far left will be joining us later in the day. Sitting on my far left at this moment is John Constantino of Grass Valley. Next on my left is Jenny Lester Moffett of Davis. On my far right is Bob Schneider of Davis, and sitting directly to my right is Sandra Meraz of Alpa. My name is Carl Longley, and I hail from Fresno. We have some Fresno State rooters in the audience, even though they lost to San Jose. So be it, after winning 9 straight, but that's another topic. Is Tam Dudek in the audience? We suspect that Tam, who is our liaison from the State Water Board, will be joining us later. I'd now like to introduce Pamela Creedon, the Executive Officer, who will be introducing her staff.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. State Board member Tam Dudek will be here later this morning. She let us know she has been delayed today. So directly across from me is Andrew Altavok, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office. And next to Andrew will be Patrick Palupa, Staff Counsel. He'll be here in about 20 minutes or so. He's running a little late as well. To my immediate right is Alex Mayer, Staff Counsel for the board. To my far left is Karen Lanfranchi Rosardi, Executive Assistant for the board. And to Karen's right is Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office. And to my immediate left is David Koop, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. In the audience, we have Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer in our Reading office, Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in our Fresno office, and Richard Lankarovich, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento. And we have a number of staff in the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jenny, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice and justice for all. Thank you. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda and are available here at the staff table and upon request, and are posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens during breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi Rosardi, the Administrative Assistant. I want to let you know that we'll be hearing a couple of items in a different order than indicated on the original agenda. Today we will hear item 10, consideration of waiver reports of waste discharge, immediately after item 6, the State of the Region presentation by the Executive Officer. On Friday, we will hear item 24, the workshop for the Rice Coalition, WDRs, immediately after item 18, which is the uncontested calendar. At this time, we're ready for board communications.
I met with the Grass Valley Free Range farmer, and I will write that up for the record. And I've also met twice with SIPA over the last couple months.
Who's SIPA, please?
Go ahead.
I was wondering who SIPA was.
Sorry, the California Independent Petroleum Association.
Go ahead.
On October 11th, along with Chair Longley and Pamela Creedon, we met with Felicia Marcus and Dee Dee D'Amino to discuss the CV salts and irrigated land. Sorry about that. And on November 5th, I attended the CDFA State Board meeting in which Clay Rogers was presenting regarding groundwater. And on November 16th, I attended a CCOF board meeting for which I am a board member. And at that meeting, the Central Coast ILRP was discussed. And that is it. I'll submit these in writing as well.
Thank you. I have attended a number of events which I will write up and submit. Among those is the meeting that Jenny mentioned, CV Salts meetings. I attended 2 workshops put on by the California Water Reuse Association having to do with water reuse. The last one was actually potable reuse. very interesting workshop today having to do with water quality standards and how to meet those standards. And believe it or not, we're talking direct potable reuse, although probably from an economic standpoint, it's not the way to go. But, and I say we, I'm talking about the profession as a whole. The other meeting I had this last Monday, very interesting, along with Dee D'Amato, attended a briefing out in the near Dos Palos in the San Luis Irrigation District area where a tremendous amount of subsidence is taking place. Sac Dam itself is sinking about 6 inches a year, and of course this is raising havoc with farmers' fields that don't irrigate like they used to irrigate, raising particular havoc with water conveyance devices that don't go uphill, don't go downhill and instead go uphill some places. And so it's a very dramatic result. And what really impressed me was with these folks working together with exchange contractors and others, really have a plan, and they've paid for the plan. They can, based upon what their consultant says, get a handle on this subsidence in their particular area. It's a major issue. It's interesting to note that because of subsidence and overpumping in other areas, which has caused reversal in water flow, there is a water quality issue. It's not just subsidence. They're moving salt into fresh water. So part of their plan is to be able to mitigate against the movement of salt and the deterioration of water quality. So it was probably one of the more informative briefings. I understand that the executive officer has been there also. Pamela's been there as part of a San Joaquin restoration tour. And it's something that I think we need to look to help folks that are doing the right thing as much as we can. Any further input?
Yeah, I attended the land transfer ceremony for the Woodland Davis surface water treatment project, and that'll provide screening on the last major intake on the Sacramento River, which is really important. They haven't taken in any water skiers by mistake yet, but that was the threat, I think. But it will certainly do a lot for salmon and other fish in the Sacramento River. And I had the privilege of meeting finally a Assemblyman member, Don Logue, and mentioned that I was on the subcommittee for marijuana for the regional board. So.
Very good. Thank you all for your time and the effort that you put in. At this point in time, is the time for public forum, agenda item number 4. Do we have any cards? Is there anyone wishing to address the board at this time in a public forum on any item that's not on the agenda for today or tomorrow? If not, we will move on to agenda item 5, which is the executive officer's report.
Well, it's in the agenda, and I don't have anything further except for my presentation on the next item. So employee awards will be tomorrow. So if there are any questions on the report itself, I'll be happy to take any.
We're waiting for your state of the region.
Item 6. We're on item 6 of the agenda now.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Well, good morning. So every year, or not every year, I try to make it every year. This time, I think in 2011 was my last report to the board. But this is more an update on where we've been for the last couple of years. And I also, in terms of the board, this is one to highlight the work of staff and to highlight the work of the board. But it's also because I am your one and only employee, really. It's my very public presentation on performance for the board as well. So with that, I love this picture. I took this recently in October. It's a picture of Sardine Lake up in Plumas County. It's a very nice lake. So today I'm just going to give you a little background on the board, a status on our major programs, some information on our statewide efforts, which draws a lot of our staff time away from our major programs, discuss some of the achievements we've made since the last report, and then just a quick summary. Some facts about the Central Valley. The Central Valley Regional Water Board is the largest regional board in the state. We take up about 40% of the state's land area. Just about any issue that is faced in other regional boards, whatever regulatory program they have, we have it here in the region, and we usually have the greatest amount or number of those facilities to regulate. We have about 18% of the state's population within our regional board, but our regional board also provides most of the drinking water for the state. Over 2/3 of the population receive their drinking water out of the Central Valley. We have nearly 30 million acre feet of reservoir storage, of which now we don't have that much storage, but I just took a drive up to Folsom yesterday. It's very sad to see that. We also are projected to have the highest growth in population, which all means that between the number of existing facilities, the potential number of future facilities, and people in the region, it all equates in my world as to amount of waste that we have to manage and control. So as I go forward, we'll talk about a little bit about the staffing. You'll see that as our staffing diminishes, our resources and needs for programs and protection, water quality control protection, are increasing almost exponentially as we speak. For staffing, we have about a $28 million personal services budget. Right now we're at about 223 authorized positions, 51 managers, and most of those are your technical supervisor and senior managers. We've got about 156 technical staff supported in 3 offices in Redding, Sacramento, and Fresno, and 7 support staff who do an outstanding job of helping our technical staff and executive staff. We used to have student hires, but with the recent changes, with the governor's change in agreement with some of the unions, we now hire temp hires. So we have about 34 temporary help as opposed to student hires. This is a chart showing how our staffing has progressed over the year. I believe 2009, 2010 was our peak number since I've been the executive officer. With 274, we're now at 223. They're split between the 3 offices, in Sacramento being the one with the most number of employees, and Fresno, and then Redding with the least. We've done a great job over the last few years of merging that. We have our program managers spread throughout the 3 offices. Staff has done a stellar job of coming together and meeting with all the 3 offices to make sure we're coordinated and improve our consistency. We have staff roundtables that they meet so that all 3 offices are speaking to one another and working more closely together in terms of how to how we implement our rules and regulations and policies. And it's just, even though we have 3 offices, we are truly one regional board as opposed to 3 separate. But we have our specialty areas in each of the different offices. We do expect some potential retirements in the next few years. We'll have about 6 management retire in the management staff, 3 or 5 technical staff retirements, and 2 support. And to do that, we've been working and discussing in our executive management group and leadership group on succession planning. And also we've been doing some education in terms of leadership and providing some opportunities for some of our senior staff levels to work on special projects so that they have an opportunity to lead projects and manage projects. And we do that quite a bit throughout the board, our daily work, so that we can give people opportunity to display their ability to lead and lead staff and manage huge projects, so that we have that opportunity when we get these retirements that we can promote from within, which is a great thing to do. In terms of staff distribution, over 56% of our technical staff are allocated to our traditional groundwater programs, 25% to our surface water programs, and then planning about 12%, with just 7% to our executive. And of that are our assistant executive officers, who are very, very engaged in the day-to-day business, so they pretty much can spend their time over in either groundwater or surface water. As you can see, the surface water takes 25% of our resources, but that's the one we hear the most about because it's the one that's visible. Be it groundwater. Groundwater is becoming, has always been one of our largest resource allocation, and we will see that grow as time moves on. So let me get into the major programs. In terms of groundwater protection, 56% of our resources are allocated to groundwater, but that's divvied up between a number of different programs, which I'll discuss individually. The one I won't discuss until later will be the Irrigated Lands Program, because that one has it's a non-point source program. It's funded predominantly through a lot of the what we call our WDPF funding, and so therefore it fell into the groundwater protection, and our long-term program is to address groundwater protection, but up until now it's been a surface water. This groundwater protection program is under the California Water Code. It's for those facilities that we regulate to protect waters of the state. It's for those that don't fall under the federal jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act. And so the waters of the state is all-encompassing. It includes all surface waters, all groundwaters that we protect. And the waters of the U.S., which fall under the federal laws, are a subset of the waters of the state. There are far more waters of the state than there are waters of the U.S. in the state of California. So I'll be talking about each one of these individually. Our WDR program is a long-standing program. It's one of our larger ones. We regulate wastewater treatment plants that treat their water and then discharge it to land. Or we do industries such as the food processing industry shown here in the picture. We have about 1,400 individual facilities that we regulate to date. That makes up about 49% of the total facilities in the state. We have about 29 staff allocated to this program. They're distributed between the 3 offices as shown here, with Sacramento, Fresno being the largest with 43% of the staff and 38% to Sacramento, and then 19 to Ready. And the caseload and the number of facilities regulated pretty much follow that same percentage. We regulate our facilities through a number of different tools. We have our individual waste discharge requirements, which are shown here in orange, the bottom. And then in the red, the waivers, the 5-year waivers. Our WDRs, our waste discharge requirements, do not have expiration dates, but they do have mandatory review periods. So staff have to review and look at them to see if they need to be updated at any time. And it's depending on the threat to water quality, sets the timeline in which the review is required. The orange, or red, which is the waivers, those are mandatory 5-year renewals, similar to our surface water program. And the yellow, or the light blue, are general orders. We have a tremendous backlog of permits for the WDR program. It's something that staff has been focused on, and we've been working diligently to try and move as many of our individual orders into general orders, because that, in terms of staff resources, it doesn't diminish the protection of groundwater. It just diminishes the need for individual permits and staff resources. So as you can see, we have in 2010 and 2011, we had a large increase in waiver enrollees because we were moving more and more over into the, not waiver, to the general orders. And we will continue to look forward to doing that. In doing so, we were able to reduce our backlog of WDRs by about 30% over the last couple of years. But we still have an outstanding 200 applications waiting for our action. We have a number of challenges because of the staff resource constraint. In terms of inspections, we schedule complete approximately 150 inspections a year, but that doesn't account for the remaining of the 1,400, only 150 tend to get inspected in a year. We also get a number of reports submitted by the dischargers, which require a significant amount of staff time to review. We are continually looking at our requests for reports in our orders so that we can diminish the number, get the right number, that give us the right information, and try to reduce the frequency and number of reports so that it's more efficient for staff to take the time to review it. As I tell staff, when they write their permits, they're also writing their work plan for the year, because this board and I do, and all of our supervisors and managers expect that if you're going to receive a report, you need to review the report. So, in this program also happens to be the program that everything gets drawn from. So if there is a complaint, it's drawn from the waste discharge. If there's a shortfall in some of our other programs like dairies or irrigated lands, we pull staff from that to work on this program. So it only compounds our issue of trying to address our backlog and our resource issues. Our land disposal program, or Title 27, is one of our more prescriptive programs. They're set in regulations. The dischargers know exactly what's required of them because it's a very prescriptive program. It's probably one of our more efficient programs, but even with that, we still have resource constraints. It's one of the programs where it deals with closed or active landfills, so about 40% of our resources are allocated to this. They also have about 20% of our resources going to mines, active and closed mines, and about 50% to the oil field work. We've been pretty successful in this program over the last couple of years. We've closed a number of our more older landfills. We've closed them and expanded the requirements for them to make sure they're more fully compliant with our regulations. And we've provided oversight to over 350 of Title 27 facilities. We've completed 17 waste discharge requirements, updating those requirements, and have conducted hundreds of inspections of these sites. Over the past few years, with the same number of resources, staff has been able to put and increase the number of waste discharge requirements, updates and reviews, and new requirements developed by staff. And we look forward to continuing to maintain this same rate of output for our program. The 20% of staff that are allocated to the mines, we've been working to increase our oversight on that. We've been able to secure some resources from State Board to help find responsible parties for our legacy mine or inactive mines that continue to be a problem for us in terms of water quality. We have about 64 mines that we currently regulate. 37 of those are legacy mines, with about 26 of those being issued some form of an order to regulate them. The remaining, I'm sure, we'll get them under order as soon as we can find responsible parties. We have 27 currently operating mines because of the price of precious metals. The mining activity has increased over the recent years, and we have all of those 27 currently operating mines under some form of an order by the board. We're also looking to find ways to identify more cost recovery activities in order to increase the number of staff that are allocated to our mine work. This is a success story of a mine. These were the Bully Hill and Rising Star mines in Shasta County. These were two abandoned copper mines discharging acid mine drainage to surface waters for over 100 years. The mines were transferred to an environmental trust through a bankruptcy court recently in 2010, and our staff, with the help of Patrick Palupa, who's not here, we were able to secure $8 million towards remediation and long-term operation and maintenance of this site. We've spent about $2 million and have been able to significantly or pretty much stop all of the surface water discharge at this time. And we were able, through that work, to remove about 95% of the remaining metals that had previously gone into surface waters are now being treated, and then the water is then going back into the groundwater. And we have adequate funds left over for many years of operation and maintenance. These mines are tributary to the Horse. They were discharging into the Horse Creek and Town Creek, which is tributary to the Squaw Creek, which is ultimately Lake Shasta. So this is a big success story for our abandoned mines. Our dairy program, which was the more rigid program, was developed and adopted by this board in 2007 with a recent renewal, recently with just this last year for our revised order. We have about 1,400 dairies now. In 2007, we had just over 1,600. But we still have about the same number of cows. In fact, the number of cows have increased slightly over the last few years. So fewer dairies, but the same number of cows, so the same loading of waste to our groundwater and potential surface water discharges. We handle this with staff in the 3 offices, predominantly in Sacramento and Redding with 12 staff. We were recently, in the last few years, able to increase that number. We still have a number of facilities that need regulation under our confined animal program, which are poultry and feedlot, about 200 poultry facilities and 200 feedlots. Our dairies are situated predominantly in the south part of our valley and in the San Joaquin Valley. We have some up in the Tehama Valley. The purple line here on this map shows the valley floor. Dairies don't tend to go up into the foothills; they stay on the lower floors. And so this is most of our staffing, of course, fall within the Sacramento and Redding, Fresno offices for these programs. Since 2007, we've made a concerted effort to make sure that all of our facilities are inspected. It came to light a couple of years ago that we've had some facilities that hadn't been inspected in almost 10 years. So we put a concerted effort and had an initiative to where over the last couple of years, 100% of all of our dairies have been inspected now. And we will maintain using our staff and look at about 1/3 of the dairies per year so that every one of them is inspected over the next 5 years. We continue into our enforcement program. I didn't point out in the very beginning, this program, this is really the only enforcement I talk about. Next meeting, Andrew Altavogt will be presenting our overview of our enforcement activities for the board. We started our program with more informal notices of violation, and starting in 2009, we started our more formal enforcement activities. We see those activities increasing over the year. We found that using our inspections and our staff verbal comments and phone calls and conversations with the dischargers have been very good about getting the dairies into compliance with most of their requirements, and the more formal ones are for the more recalcitrant dairies that tend to not want to do what the requirements require them to do. So this is a good trend, and with it we're seeing some improved compliance throughout the dairy industry overall. Moving forward, we'll continue with our compliance program, focusing mostly on off-site discharges to make sure we don't have any of this waste going. Our program prohibits waste to any surface water. We are also looking at animal mortality. We seem to have a real problem with that with some of our dairy. They are not allowed to bury the cows on site. And we're also looking more closely at the nutrient management to make sure that it's being developed and properly implemented to protect water quality. We'll continue in our permitting efforts. We were delayed a little this last couple of years with the petitions and the aqua lawsuit, but we will be moving forward with the poultry and feedlots. We also need to update our current order to address the irrigated lands. Some of our dairy lands once were considered part of the irrigated lands program, and now that they're in the dairy program, they are still irrigated lands. So we'll need to make some changes to that order to bring it more consistent with our irrigated lands program. We'll also continue to work with the dairy industry on the representative monitoring program as the information comes forward. We expect one huge report at the end of that 6-year period but in the interim, as we evaluate the data as it comes in annually, we are working with the industry to make sure that they do change practices that are found not to be effective throughout the program. We're not waiting to the very end to deal with ineffective programs or BMPs. Our underground storage tank program, which has been in place since 1985, which has 2 components to it. It has the prevention and leak detection program, which is maintained by our local agencies, not the state. And then we have our cleanup program, where we have identified leaks from previous tanks or existing tanks. And we split those between the regional board and some local agencies. Currently, the regional board has about 660 cases that we take the lead on, and that represents about 22% of the statewide workload for underground storage tanks. It's handled by a little over 16 PYs that is split between the 3 offices. In the past year, we reviewed almost 1,000 reports and issued over 1,400 directives to our facilities that we're regulating. We also, this program has been in a somewhat of a state of flux because of the 2 cent per gallon fee that funds the program. The legislators recently approved an extension of that will expire in 2015, December of 2015. We think it may be extended again, but it may not. And so with that, we will have to look at ways so our staff we won't lay off staff. They'll be rerouted through other programs, or we're also looking to find ways to turn this into a cost recovery program, because some of our underground storage tank cases are pretty complex, and the ones that are remaining are the more difficult ones that we will have to continue to have oversight on for some time. But we're looking at all those options on how we're going to be dealing with this program in the event that in 2015 the 2 cents per gallon is not extended. We also have about 520 cases that are handled by the local agencies. They take the lead, but we are not removed from that. We continue to meet with the local agencies to review their cases. It's not unusual that after they have some of their more complex cases, typically end up at the water board for us to take over, and it's usually after a number of years. So we're working to make sure that time period is shortened so that we don't have cases out there for a number of years with not much happening on them. We've been able to do a great job over the last couple of years with cleaning and completing 127 of our board lead cases and closing those sites and moving 51 cases into active remediation in the past year. Our performance measure happens to be the rate of closure, and as you can see, the red line is the statewide regional board closure rate on an average, and the orange line is that for the Region 5. We continue to lead in the state in the number of closures per year, and we've, with the existing staff that we have, in fact, we've actually lost staff resources in this program and been able to improve our rate of closure. And we anticipate to maintain that same closure over the next couple of years. This is an illustration. We close far more cases than we open, which is a testament to the work with staff and their ability to get our cases moving forward into remediation and closure. We also have been fully compliant with the low closure policy developed by State Board recently. And we've been working on some of the older cases to bring them to closure sooner. We've been using many tools in order to effectively bring people current and getting better progress on the case closure for these sites. Our site cleanup program, this is really one that's more like a it's reimbursable program. So we have staff, but the staff are supported by payment from the responsible parties for staff to provide oversight on these cases. We have about just short of 1,300 active sites right now, with about 472 of those in remediation. The other remediation is when they're actually cleaning up the site. Before it moves into remediation, there's a lot of work done in terms of defining the nature and extent of the pollution that's occurred, and the type of remediation that will take place. And so that's why that's that difference. A number of those are still in just that investigative stage. We've also been able in the last couple of years to close 206. We have different cases. We have private sites, and we have our federal sites, which are our military bases. And then we have Aerojet, which is out there all on its own, but it's a private site, but it has so many sites. It has over 300 cleanup sites alone on the Aerojet. We have one staff dedicated to that site, Alex McDonald. In the private, we have 541 private sites and about 435 federal sites in our workload.
Pamela, on that last slide,
Yes.
I'm presuming that the Aerojet and DoD, DOE sites our personnel costs are paid for by the responsible parties. Is that correct?
All of these are paid for by responsible.
All of them, including the private.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
This is this is similar to like almost like a consulting operation. We have to get the responsible parties to agree to pay for staff cost. We do not have a fee process to pay for staff in this program.
Thank you.
Of course, our performance measures by State Board are in sites closed and sites that are moved from investigation to remediation. The red line there provides the trend of sites closed over the last few years. The blue on the trend of sites moved into remediation. And then, of course, the green are the new sites we bring into the program. And as you can see, we've just been increasing that rate over the last few years, a testament to the work of staff. This is just a chart illustrating the amount of comparison of workload of Region 5 to the rest of the state. We have about 27% of the workload of the entire state in site cleanup, and yet we account for over 41% of the sites closed in the state. As to noteworthy projects, this is our McClellan site. It's James Taylor is the senior staff assigned to this. He's done a great job with McClellan. This is a program where I've been able to do early transfers. Early transfers is where the government transfers the work of the cleanup to a private industry, and it is paid for by the government, and that's been very successful here at McClellan. We have right in the last year we've transferred another 528 acres into the early transfer, bringing the total to just under 1,800 acres now in the early transfer program. We have about a remaining 1,700 or 1,600 acres left, with about 300 of those being transferred later on this year, with anticipation over the next few years of the remaining falling into the privatization. In the last 2 years, 27 removal actions were completed to remove radium contaminated at a number of sites, including sediments and bank deposits along a stretch of Magpie Creek. That material and other contaminated soil and debris that had been excavated from other sites around the base are being placed in a recently completed 7-acre consolidation unit that's shown here. And the first load of the contaminated soil is being placed in the new disposal facility. Other sites include the Aerojet. Aerojet is continued to expand its groundwater extraction and treatment system. They're now treating over 19,000 gallons per minute of extracted groundwater, removing over 150 pounds of contaminants per day. That project is led by Alex McDonald. The cleanup program staff have also been working towards cleaning up the Sacramento rail yard so that this property can be redeveloped. A number of important projects have recently been completed at the rail yard, including the track relocation and the finalization of the central shops and groundwater cleanup plan. The site cleanup program also continues to regularly respond to emergency spills, and this past year they responded to 2 tanker truck accidents where several thousand gallons of gasoline were spilled onto the side of the roadway. So moving into our surface water protection program. About 25% of our staff are allocated to a number of programs: stormwater, 401 CERT, timber harvest, there's a T missing there, and our traditional NPDES program. Again, timber harvest is surface water, but it's not a federally mandated program. It's more of our non-point source program, so I'll be talking that under our non-point source program. NPDES, this is our traditional permitting program for surface water, for point sources as defined by the Federal Clean Water Act as a discharge to waters of the U.S. This one has a lot of attention given to it because of it being surface water. Our permit staff, our NPDES staff, they issue permits and renewals, they process amendments, and a number of rescissions. They use enforcement orders where they cannot put compliance schedules within a permit. They issue enforcement orders to provide time to our dischargers to fully comply with requirements. And they also have spent a number of time in development and implementation of general permits, such as fish hatcheries, limited threat, low threat, and petroleum cleanup. We have a little over 16 staff allocated to permitting, which is distributed between the 3 offices, and it's related to the number of permits assigned to each of the offices. Our permitting actions over the last few years, we are doing as much as we can to move some of these discharges into general orders, such as our fish hatchery. So in 2010, the blue is for renewals and new, red are for rescissions, the green is for amendments and changes, and the purple is for enforcement orders, which we use as for time schedule compliance orders. In 2010 and 9, we had a large number of rescissions. That's because we developed a general order for fish hatcheries and were able to remove individual orders and put a large number of facilities under a general order. We also had at that time, that's when the CTR and that's compliance time schedules provided in orders now had to move into time schedule orders or cease and desist orders in order to provide additional time to our facilities that were still working on constructing facilities to comply with the order. So that's why we had a peak in that. We do have a tremendous backlog in our process. We were able to successfully bring that considerably down, almost to 0 in 2009. We were at 0 in Redding and Fresno. These permits just they expire every 5 years. And so if you see this, you'll see there's a trend every 5 years. There's a mountain that is created in terms of our backlog. We're working now to try and level that out a little bit. We're going to be renewing and adopting about 25 permits a year so that we balance that out and we don't have this huge mountain every 5-year cycle. We're also looking to see what other general orders we can develop to put more of our individual permits for those that are not as complex or high threat, move them into general orders so we can spend the time we need to on those more complicated facilities and give them the time that's required. It's a little difficult. A lot of people think these are easy to do. These permits are difficult. They're extremely time consuming. And one of the reasons is because things keep changing. Our standards keep changing, EPA and policies keep changing, new regulations are put in place. Here we've gone through this huge update of our permits with the California toxic rule and implementing ammonia and nitrate removals in all of our facilities, major construction projects as a result of our activities, our actions. And we just recently had a new standard released from EPA on ammonia, which significantly reduces the ammonia. We're still investigating to see what that means in terms of our permits and what it means to our dischargers. But when in climate change, not knowing what climate change may mean to our permits and a few other things, things keep continuing to change. And so even sometimes the simple permits become very complex when we have to make those review them every 5 years. We've had some success since 2006, and I'm sure before that time. We've had some ups and downs, but we were able through the successfully move the Placer County forward for regionalization with the City of Lincoln to ultimately shut the Placer County SMD1 facility down and move their waste stream downstream into the Lincoln. We also had some very good news that the City of Auburn recently agreed to buy capacity in the line, so hopefully we'll have a true regional program up in the foothills here soon. We continue to have challenges with our permit renewal and backlog, and also dealing with the new changes and implementation of new requirements, and then trying to implement even newer requirements to account for the new standards. Our other more traditional Clean Water Act program is our stormwater program. We have about a little over 9 staff assigned in 3 offices. We have about 102 municipal separate storm sewer systems. The stormwater program started in late 1990s. It was a Clean Water Act amendment that created it that made stormwater a point source. And municipal storm sewer systems were done in 2 phases. It was phase 1 for the larger and medium facilities, and then which are traditional cities, and some larger in facilities like the Port of Stockton. And then we have the industrial and construction program. And our industrial and construction program, those are permits adopted by the state board, and we enroll them and we inspect and enforce the permit that's adopted by the state board. Those activities will, Andrew will be discussing those under his enforcement since that's where it falls. But it is a staff resource on ours to make sure that we have compliance. Our municipal program, the phase 1, are all done through individual orders. We have 7 orders issued to our phase 1 program. And we have a phase 2, which are our smaller and non-traditional, smaller communities and non-traditional, so about 50,000 people or less on small, and non-traditional such as parks and federal facilities. And the state board has a general order. So that's a general order. And the state board recently adopted a new phase 2 order, which significantly increased the requirements on our phase 2 permittees, which ultimately means more requirements on resources from the regional boards in order to implement and enforce. For our municipal program, we do what we call inspections, but they're actually called audits. And we were able to conduct a number of audits in 2011, 2012. We specifically assigned one individual to do that. We were able to get a good number of them done. And together with the resources provided through PG Environmental as a contractor for US EPA. We've lost the contractor support. We've also, the staff person retired, and we lost that position in the budget sweep. So we will continue to do our audits, but not at the pace that we were able to do earlier. We have, and Andrew, I'll just go through this quickly. We have a number of construction cases. They've diminished over the years because of the economy, but we're going to be seeing that those numbers increase over the time. So with that, we also have not had as many enforcement cases. Industrial, we put a new focus on our industrial program, which has helped. We still have a number of non-filers that staff will be working on over the time. Both the construction and industrial permits are being currently reviewed by the state board, and we anticipate over the next couple of years a new permit to be issued for both of these. And staff will be working with the state board in developing those permits. Also, I should say, in the municipal program, we are working right now. We've been able to successfully get a stakeholder group together to look at a general permit for phase 1 and potentially phase 2 permittees in the Central Valley. We've had about 3 or 4 meetings with the group, and there's been a strong interest at all levels in order for us to have a general order. So we're not issuing 7 individual phase 1 permits, but we have a general order, and it'll be written such that we can incorporate and bring in the phase 2 facilities as well. With a focus on addressing our water quality issues that have been associated with the municipal urban runoff. The Water Quality Certification Program is another water quality program. Our NPDES program is under the 402, Section 402 of the Federal Clean Water Act. The Water Quality Certification Program is under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, and it's triggered when there is a request for a Section 404 section of the Clean Water Act. 404 is administered by the Federal Corps of Engineers, and it's about dredge and fill activities, which also incorporates anytime there's a dredge or fill activity, which also incorporates our wetlands. They need to go to the Corps for a permit. The Corps cannot issue a permit until 401 certification has been either issued or waived by the regulatory agency responsible. So we have about 4 staff members assigned to this program throughout the 3 offices, and currently we're processing about 250 certifications a year. We've had a slight downturn in the number of certifications because of the construction, but it's been somewhat level because in place of the private construction, we've had a number of public construction projects that have taken place through the economy stimulation and whatnot. So we've been able to, it's a workload for staff to do this. We also have been doing a number of high-profile projects for this. We've been working on the high-speed rail project, the Placer County HCP, thank you, Habitat Conservation Plan, and the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan, 2 large offline reservoir creation projects, the Mound Farms Wetland Restoration Project, the Delta Water Storage Project, large development in the Millerton Lake area with significant vernal pool habitat, the Highway 99 Bridge Project over the San Joaquin River, and a few wetland projects, and of course, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan project for the tunnels. We've also been working on the water quality cert for the Battle Creek Restoration Project, where there are about 42 miles of a salmon spawning habitat, which is due for restoration. And the restoration project involves a removal of a number of dams along Battle Creek. So on top of just the normal workload, those are other things that have been expedited in high-profile projects that the staff has had to deal with. Here's one of our more success stories, a Bass Lake Crane Valley Dam earthquake retrofit project. The photo shows the turbid water caused by the dredge of sediment in front of the dam. The turbidity was contained and prevented from entering Bass Lake by a well-designed silt curtain. The project was a success because the discharger worked with staff to develop an extensive in-water monitoring program, a very effective stormwater pollution prevention plan, and a spill contingency plan and countermeasure plan. The discharger used an active stormwater treatment system for runoff from the project because of the clay soils in the area, and effectively responded to an oil spill caused when an unknown oil drum was excavated from the bottom of the lake. This is located in the Madera County area and was worked on by our Fresno staff. We've had some challenges in the water quality certification program. We recently had an audit by the state auditor in response to a complaint about inconsistency in our enforcement and implementation of the program. The audit did in fact find some inconsistencies in tracking water quality certification applications between the regions, inconsistency in the application forms and in compliance with the Permit Streamline Act. They found failure in proper tracking of our water quality projects, but they actually found that we were pretty fair and consistent and predictable in our enforcement. So the reason for the audit, they found we were fair, but in doing so they found some inconsistency or problems.
Pamela?
Yes.
So when you say our or we, is that a statewide our or we, or is that a region we?
Statewide.
Statewide, thank you.
Yes. Staff spent a lot of time with the auditors. It was quite a staff resource intensive project. Because of staff limitations, with only four staff assigned throughout the entire region, we have limited staff to do field inspections for verification that actual mitigation projects are actually being implemented. We also get a number of complaints, and we have limited staff that can follow up on complaints, but we tend to refer those to other agencies. But with that limitation, it's very difficult for us to verify the no net loss policy requirements are being met. What's being done to address some of these challenges, the State Board is working to develop an online application and develop a template so that we have consistency throughout the state and how we ask for information, but also for a project proponent to track their application online. We also are improving our CWIC statewide database system to better track certification permits and inspections so that we can better report how well we're doing with meeting the no net loss policy. And here in the region, we will continue to coordinate working with other programs such as the stormwater program to help us better inspect and maintain and track some of the activities in the field. So in our planning activities, this is the overarching. It's a program that consumes about 12% of our resources. but what they do can significantly impact the other programs, especially in dealing with surface water. It involves our non-point source program, our TMDLs, and basin planning activities. So here's where I'm going to talk about the Irrigated Lands program because it's a non-point source program. It covers both surface and groundwater. You've heard a lot about the program, so I'm going to quickly go through these. We recently received through a governor's budget, an additional 3 staff persons. We're bringing the total to 18 throughout the 3 regional boards. That at the current time means about 1,400 dischargers to our staff, per staff. As we move into the long-term program, we can expect that to increase to just about 2,000 dischargers per staff, or just under 400,000 acres per staff. Those 3 new PYs were assigned to Fresno because with the long-term program, they'll be doubling the number of acres that are regulated through that staff and more coalitions to deal with. We've been really busy in the Irrigated Lands program with the long-term program. So far to date, we've issued and recommended and the board adopted 3 general orders, the individual order, the Tulare Lake order, and the East San Joaquin. This also included 1 revision already to the East San Joaquin order. We've done a number of administrative drafts currently with the outstanding coalitions with the Western San Joaquin River, the Western Tulare, the Sacramento River, the Sacramento Valley Rice, and the San Joaquin County and Delta. The 7 tentative WDRs, what the process is we generally draft something. It goes out as an administrative draft that goes out to all the interested parties for them to comment on. And then from there, in those comments, we may issue another administrative draft or we may issue the tentative. The tentative is the more public one where we're actually receiving public comment. That's the one that will go into the board package or changes to the tentative. So we've done a number of those. We've had 2 versions of tentatives for the individual order. We had 2 versions of the Tulare Lake order. We had the revisions to the East San Joaquin, the Western San Joaquin, and the Western Tulare Lake Basin are all tentative orders that are out there, or were out there, or are out there now. We have some challenges with finding the non-filers, and as we expand this program to include the groundwater, we have a number of growers that we need to outreach to and bring them into the program, and also just the mere activity of implementing the new requirements is quite staff intensive. One of the most successful parts of this program is that where we see we have a water quality issue, the coalitions are required to develop management plans, water quality management plans. This is our surface water program. We'll be implementing a similar thing for groundwater. To date, we have over 700 plans brought into our program dealing with different water body parameter problems. And to date, we've been able to complete or approve 100 of those 700 plans that have been developed with some noticeable water quality improvement. Not all of those were results of water quality improvement. Some of them were completed because the coalitions were able to successfully show, and staff fully agrees, that agriculture were not the source of the problems for the water quality issues we discovered. We continue to work hard to bring non-participants into the program by issuing orders and letters. So to date, we've issued well over 3,000 letters to individuals to bring them into the program. The other non-point source program is our timber harvest. We have over 45% of the timber harvest activities in the state within our regional board. This is a program that's responsible for the review and oversight of discharges related to timber harvest activities on both non-federal and federal lands. In addition, timber staff is involved in a wide variety of projects in our forested watersheds besides timber, including off-highway vehicle use areas, rural road construction, reconstruction and maintenance activities, utility line right-of-way clearing, meadow and aspen restoration efforts, and post-fire resource damage and mitigation efforts. In terms of timber harvest, we do receive plans. We receive the timber harvest plans from the non-federal timber harvest permits, which is the discretionary activities. That's about 200 a year. We receive about, we have about 800 non-discretionary, non-federal timber harvest permits with no environmental review requirements prior. These are the emergency activities. And then we have the U.S. Forest Service, about 100 of timber harvest and management fuel projects on Forest Service lands. In 2002, the AB 1492 created the Timber Regulation and Forest Restoration Fund, which created a taxation on timber to fund positions both for the Water Board and other agencies, and this was to remove them from the general fund funding. That resulted in 4 new staff for the program, which a little over 4 for the state, which 4.3, and 4 of those were allocated to the Central Valley, bringing our total count now to 100, I wish it was 100, 11 staff for the program total. We had, the AB 42 requires that we increase our number of inspections. It also requires that we do an ecological performance evaluation, which staff will be participating with CAL FIRE. And we have to complete a report annually to the legislature, and the first one due in January. I'm sorry. I didn't finish this. We do conduct our major performance happens to be in compliance inspections. We had a target for the last 2 years of 100 inspections, and with the staff, we were able to conduct in 2011 and 12 137 inspections, and then last year 179 inspections. There was a notable increase last year because of the work done in the Battle Creek watershed area. Historically, our program focused on pre-project inspections to be as proactive as possible to deal with sediment sources that pose the greatest threat to water quality and eliminate those as the project moves forward. But with AB 1492, that focus is now changing with the increased requirements of inspections both during and upon completion of the projects. So that's going to take a little different focus for our staff. Ongoing, we're looking to we have our waiver that's due up in 5 years and will have to be renewed. And with that, we'll have to start and revise the waiver to include the new working forest management plan that was recently passed by the governor through AB 904. And also, we're looking to remove the U.S. Forest Service activities from that waiver and then create a separate permit for them directly. What you're looking at here is at the rimfire, recent rimfire. The first one is emergency response team member that's conducting a soil test to confirm the burn intensity on soil. And the other one is a feller buncher burned over, I don't know what that's called. I'm sorry, I'm reading stuff. A feller buncher burned over the 2013 rimfire on U.S. Forest Service lands. A feller buncher or hot saw grabs the tree at the base and cuts it and then swings it around and stacks the logs. That was one of our largest fires, and our staff in the timber harvest program, we have sent them around the state in response to some of our major fires to help do post-fire emergency response to ensure that the erosion from these sites are not impacting our water quality. In terms of basin planning, we have about a little over 19 staff assigned to this. 17 of those are through fees generated. There is an added fee added to our discharges that goes into basin planning, and with a little over 2 for federal grants. We have the majority of the work for our TMDLs and our development of our integrated report, which is the 303D list, which is our impaired water body. 303D is a reference to the Clean Water Act that requires this. There's also 305B, which is required that we do an assessment of our ambient water quality. We've integrated those reports, so we do 303D and 305 together. So it's an integrated report. That's predominantly handled by our Sacramento staff for doing that work. It's time intensive. We have to look at all the data. It has to be quality data. And then we have to justify whether we want to list or delist water bodies from the 303D list. And what's important about this 303D list and why it's so important is because it decides when a TMDL, or total maximum daily load, needs to be developed. If it's on the 303D list, they pretty much need to have a TMDL. There are other avenues, but the 303D usually ends up in a TMDL development. The TMDL development is done also predominantly through our Sacramento office as well. So most of that work is done here. We have about 13 of the 19 staff assigned to just TMDL development and implementation. The remaining staff work towards other types of basin plan activities such as CV salts and other basin plan amendments that are needed. Since 1994, we've had 23 amendments to the basin plan, and since 2002, 10 of those have been associated with TMDLs. Our TMDLs are implemented through our basin plan, which the TMDLs address about 60 impaired water bodies, including the delta and tributaries to the delta. We've had measurable improvements in all these water bodies. By the end of 2014, we're projecting an additional 6 amendments to be brought to the board. And some of our TMDL accomplishments with diazinon and chlorpyrifos reductions. They've been implemented mostly through our our Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and have, along with other parallel regulatory and non-regulatory efforts, resulted in substantial reduction in these pesticides in waters throughout the Central Valley region, with the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers meeting the TMDL and water quality objectives in recent years. In addition, most of our delta waterways are also meeting the TMDL requirements. We still need a diazinon and chlorpyrifos reductions in some tributaries, and we are continuing to work on those. The delta methyl mercury, the board will hear more detailed about this presentation later today. In general, we have more dischargers and other entities working on methyl mercury best management practices studies, and exposure reduction activities are planned to start next year. One of our other major accomplishments is the drinking water policy. It's the most important element of the policy are that the recognition of current drinking water protection efforts and a new narrative water quality objective for Cryptosporidium and Giardia, and the implementation element of the objective. Our board adopted this policy in July, and the state board approved it this last Tuesday at its recent meeting. And I put the Delta RMP here. It fits and it doesn't fit here, so I didn't know where to put it, so this is where I put it. So we're continuing to work with the Delta dischargers and other stakeholders for a regional monitoring program. The mission has been developed by the stakeholder group the purpose of the Delta RMP is to inform decisions on how to protect and, where necessary, restore beneficial uses of water in the Delta by producing objective and cost-effective scientific information critical to understanding regional water quality conditions and trends. This is a high priority project for our board that will have long-term benefits once established. We need to assess the Delta water quality in a comprehensive manner and improve the efficiency and coordination among the many entities that are monitoring Delta water quality as part of permit requirements or as part of other agency monitoring programs. We're looking to replace our individual in receiving water monitoring programs with a more coordinated system as part of the Delta RMP. And you recently adopted a resolution confirming the board commitment to this process. The backbone of the governance structure is an 11-seat steering committee group comprised of representatives from agriculture, POTWs, stormwater groups, water supply, state and federal regulators, coordinated monitoring groups, and resource agencies. The Aquatic Science Center was identified as the entity to coordinate initial implementation of the program. They work with the RMP also down in the estuary, the San Francisco estuary. And a technical advisory committee is being developed to guide the development of a scientifically sound monitoring framework. I should also point out that the Delta RMP was included in the recent Delta Stewardship Council's Delta Plan as a water quality recommendation, and that the RMP is expected to play a role in the Delta Science Plan and can aid in the development of the science action agenda for the Delta. Management questions have been designed by the steering committee by the stakeholder group to address issues related to status and trends, sources and loadings, forecasting and effectiveness, and tracking. These questions will be applied one of the priority topics, which they've decided to be mercury, nutrients, pathogens, pesticides, and toxicity. We have basin planning efforts for the next 5 years, but we do have some challenges. With the increasing scope of projects brings increased complexities. For example, we must explain how a proposed amendment will change the environment so that we need to establish the baseline of the variety of environmental conditions within the geographic area of the amendment and explain the impact of the proposed amendment on the different discharger types that are affected. Increasing the scope of a project increases the environmental conditions that must be considered and the types of dischargers that may be affected by the amendment. While public participation is a very key element in basin planning, there is an increasing interest in basin planning activities, so there is a need for more public meetings, and we are spending many more resources to develop information to inform public on these projects, which is needed and necessary, but it slows the process down. Staff will also be bringing a number of amendments to the board in the next 5 years. Staff is working on several plans to control the discharges of pesticides of significant risk of surface water quality in the Central Valley. The first of this will be the chlorpyrifos and diazinon basin plan amendment that was brought to the board in April and now will be brought to you back in early 2014. The amendment will address multiple diazinon and chlorpyrifos impairments at once and establish requirements to address any future diazinon and chlorpyrifos impairments proactively. I can't say that word, obviously. Staff will also be addressing basin plan amendments to address the herbicide diaron. This will be challenging to address since it is widely used by urban and rights-of-way users in addition to ag, and we have to be concerned with the potential replacement herbicide impacts, just as we have with the insecticides. Staff will also be providing a basin plan amendment, proposing an amendment to address pyrethroid pesticides, which are a concern for the Delta and will pose a number of challenges due to the high concentration in urban streams, sediment toxicity endpoints, detection limits, and challenges inherent in control of urban stormwater. The pesticide planning control efforts will also include building on successes we've been coordinating with CASCA, the California Stormwater Quality Association, and others to work with DPR and US EPA's Office of Pesticides to protect water quality through their authority over pesticide use. An example of this success is the regulations of the professional urban pyrethroid applications adopted by DPR in 2012. Now, mercury staff will continue to work on mercury TMDLs over the next 5 years. We're going to be talking about the statewide reservoir in a couple of minutes here, I will be. But this project will cover over 50 impaired reservoirs in the Central Valley. And once the reservoir project is underway, staff will then get back to working on the impaired creeks and rivers downstream of the major reservoirs leading to the Delta. The board can expect more amendments in terms of just other basin planning issues, the municipal beneficial use for POTWs as they discharge agricultural drains. The board should be hearing about a variance policy that was driven by the salt, CV salts efforts here in the next year. And we are also looking at the MUN designation or municipal water supply designation in groundwater at the Royal Mountain King Mine, which is in response to an order remand by the state board a number of years ago. Later in this meeting, some of the other planning items you'll be hearing about is CV salts. I think that's scheduled for tomorrow, and our groundwater protection strategy. Our non-point source program, we do have a non-point source program. It's staffed. The staffing has diminished from down to just about a little over 3.5 staff assigned to that. The funding for our non-point source program has diminished as well. We use this money predominantly to deal with non-point source discharges in those areas where a TMDL program has been developed. We also use this for staff working with watershed groups and our integrated regional water management groups. That's also the resource that provides the help and outreach we provide to those groups. Some of the non-point source projects that we've used these for in our Clear Lake Nutrient Management Plan. We've used this to fund storm-proof forest service roads to decrease sedimentation into Clear Lake, which is our nutrient management. We've also worked with staff to develop plans and apply for implementation grants through the Integrated Regional Water Management. And this picture that you see here is part of the algae bloom in the Clear Lake. A very small portion of our non-point source program goes towards funding our grants. Our grants have diminished our number of staff from nearly 13 in 06-07 down to less than almost a third of a staff today. The funding for grants has diminished significantly down to what's only supplied through our 319 grants, and those are mostly provided for TMDL implementation. Our grants have focused on mercury, methyl mercury. I've had 2 projects to reduce methylization of mercury in wetlands here at pictured with the Consumnes River Preserve. We've implemented some integrated pest management in cotton, alfalfa, and almonds to reduce or eliminate OP pesticides, and also then again the storm proofing of the Forest Service roads for Clear Lake. Many of our staff, besides working on their programs, we work outside our areas to help with many statewide efforts with multi-state agencies and also statewide general orders. Recently, we've been working with the dairy program, and I've been working, and Richard Lonkarovich have been working with the CDFA, California Department of Food and Ag, and the US EPA working on trying to promote dairy digesters within the Central Valley, actually within California, but they focus on the Central Valley because we have nearly 80% of all the dairies in the state in our region. That's been an effort with multiple state and federal agencies as a way to how we can promote and move forward. We've done a number of projects, including staff working with other agencies to streamline and remove inconsistencies or better coordination with Cal Recycle and other state agencies and the Air District to streamline our permitting activity. We have a consolidated permit process where we've taken the lead to help the project proponent move their projects through the permitting process to help them keep track of where we are in the process. We've also had staff work with Cal Recycle so that we weren't duplicating regulatory oversight. And then also just recently, we took the lead on putting out a request for projects to see which we put together in this process a matrix of all the potential funding sources that could be available for dairy digester projects. And with that, we've put out a proposal for projects, and we've received 12 projects, and now we're looking at the technical group to see if any of those projects have potential for funding provided by these multiple funding sources. It would be a matching type funding in order to help promote and move digesters forward in the valley.
And I have to commend you for the leadership that you've taken with this program. It's been difficult. Digesters are quite prevalent. Dairy digesters are quite prevalent in many other states, but not here in California. And it's been a lot of regulatory barriers that I think that you have taken a leadership on to be able to overcome them, if you will. And particularly getting the number of agencies working together has been a Herculean, but I think very successful task.
It has. Dairy digesters in and of themselves they don't really right now currently do a lot for water quality, but that's part of the program is that we put together a statement of principles, this group, and part of that is that these projects have to also investigate and look at how they can ensure protection of water quality and air quality. So those are all efforts, and these projects we're looking at are how we incorporate those studies and research into that. The Governor's Bioenergy Plan, both under the Schwarzenegger administration and now under the Governor Brown's administration, we've been engaged because predominantly in this energy plan, which is multi-agency, dealing with trying to promote renewable energy sources, a lot of the dairy digester activities been involved in this plan. So I've been participating on behalf of the state board in that group. We also have the nitrate issue with the UC Davis, and it wasn't new information for us. The UC Davis just brought it to a higher level, the UC Davis report. We've been participating in the drinking water group, the governor's drinking water group, in finding ways to improve and expedite getting clean water to our severely disadvantaged communities in the valley. Also, as a result of the UC Davis report, the state board put a number of recommendations together in a report to the legislature, and I've been participating, or staff has been participating in a number of those recommendations to develop the reports. The high-risk nitrate, I sat on the nitrogen task force recently held by CDFA in order on how to report, track, and monitor nitrogen. And then some of our staff are working with State Board closely, since many of those reports will address or impact areas within our regional board. We've also had staff drawn from our day-to-day activities to work on a number of statewide policies and regulations. The on-site wastewater treatment system policy, with the late Greg Nash unfortunately we lost Greg a couple of months ago, and Rob Busby and our staff worked a lot with state board staff in developing the regulations around the on-site, the septic system policy program, and also on how to implement it. And we've been very engaged in that process, and I think we helped make this a much more workable and doable regulation. Every regulation put out or policy put out by the state board means a lot of work for us in the Central Valley. So we pay a lot of attention to it since we have so much to do in the valley. But with that said, we still have a lot of work to do. We have a basin plan amendment that has to be completed by May 2014, and Betty Yee and our planning staff, they're working on that now to implement the on-site water policy. We also have to, our local agencies have to develop local agency management plans. They have to submit those, and they have to be reviewed and approved by staff. And the policy, the regulation stipulates deadlines. They have to submit them by May 2016, and our board has to have action to approve them by 2017. And without these local the lamps being approved, would mean that those individual septic systems would then fall to us to regulate. So we use the local agencies a lot in order to implement our policy for septic systems. We have over 42%, or over about nearly 500,000 septic systems in the Central Valley. And to regulate them individually would be a significant workload for us. And the local health officials typically regulate those for us. The other thing that you heard a lot about at the last meeting was our new activity in which we now are engaging at it's beyond our boundaries, working with Region 1 and other regions and other state agencies as on the marijuana cultivation activities. It's a new effort that was brought to light by the Butte County supervisors just recently here, received extensive media coverage, which brought us to light, and especially me to light, in an unfavorable view in the public. But I think we've made a lot of progress since that time. We've had multiple meetings with different agencies and the governor's office as well, and legislators on this topic. We have a working group formed, and we're also still participating in a statewide task force effort. The working group is very large. It includes the state board, the regional boards, in particular Region 1 and Region 5, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the California Department of Forestry, local law enforcement agencies, the District Attorney Association, local counties, and of course a number of consultants. One of the things, it's very good, whatever program we put together will be staff intensive, and Clint Snyder and the AEO in the Reading office has worked with a couple of contractors to look at how we might use our staff more effectively and use technology as a way to help us identify these fields. And this is one of the things that he's been imbuing. It's a remote sensing prioritization project. He's reviewed it. We're hoping that it might get some traction, and in fact, it has some attention. We're hoping we may get some funding to implement a pilot project in this regard. This will really, if this works the way it is, it will reduce the number of staff needed in order for us to effectively find and regulate these facilities or sites. And as Clint described last time, we have a number of next steps. We'll be conducting meetings with our Fish and Wildlife meetings and the Governor's Office and other state agencies to develop and implement a broad strategy for the enforcement of regulation of the marijuana activities. Another item that's beyond just the regional board boundaries is our hydraulic fracturing and our oil fields regulatory program. You'll hear later today from Clay Rogers on an update of our program review and more about our hydraulic fracturing activity. In terms of the timber harvest program, our staff has been outstanding and been highly recognized at very many levels for their contributions to the future of this program in the state. We were able to do a Reading Timber Harvest Program 1-year pilot project at the request of Secretary Laird with the Natural Resource Agency. The goal was to evaluate possible steps for greater efficiency in the timber harvest plan process. A final report was released in August of 2013. And this process involved many agencies pursuing ways to implement several of the recommendations of the project. AB 904, the legislation that was signed in 2013 for a new type of non-expiring timber harvest plan for non-industrial landowners for up to 15,000 acres, called a Working Forest Management Plan. Staff worked with State Board and the legislative staff to ensure language is protective, and the language will require activities that's protective of water quality. Battle Creek Task Force, after a multi-agency Battle Creek Task Force produced a final 2011 report identifying county and private native surface roads systems as contributing a sediment discharge to surface waters. Staff began working with Shasta County to inventory, prioritize, and schedule best management practice implementation within the watershed. To date, many problematic watercourses and many hundreds of feet of native surface roads have been improved. Unfortunately, the watershed was subject to a wildfire that burned over 27,000 acres in the summer of 2012, and this threatens to delay the success of a $128 million restoration effort to restore 42 miles of habitat for endangered winter and spring run of Chinook salmon. Staff is also involved in an interagency pilot project with the State Department of Fish and Wildlife to test a new type of water sampler in the Battle Creek watershed. The new samplers will be used to test for commonly used pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. A continued Region 5 participation and technical review of the newly adopted road rules package. This has been a long-term effort, nearly a decade in the making. The road rules package increases the protective best management practices related to roads used for timber harvest activities on non-federal lands. And of course, our staff was deployed. We had 2 staff for 11 days working with both the federal and state teams in response to the recent rim fire. We're involved in a statewide effort to reduce fish mercury levels in the California reservoirs. While this is a multi-region approach, it is predominantly several Region 5 staff are leading. It's predominantly Region 5 activity, with several of our staff taking the lead in the technical analysis along with a Region Staff 2 person, a Central San Francisco Regional Board staff person. There are currently 74 impaired reservoirs that are part of the project, and the project is designed to address all mercury-impaired reservoirs in the state, and this project could eventually address up to 500 reservoirs across the statewide effort. This TMDL, it will include a typical source control, such as mine cleanups, erosion control to reduce mercury runoff into the reservoirs, and will look into atmospheric deposited mercury, since this is the sole source to some of our reservoirs. However, source control alone will not solve the problem in many reservoirs. For that reason, staff is working on innovative approaches for this control program that focus on water chemistry conditions within the reservoir that lead to mercury methylation and the fish species that are present that uptake the methyl mercury. Next spring, our staff, with other regional board staff, plan to start meeting with some of the reservoir owners to start working on a process to develop reservoir studies and pilot projects. This project should go to the board state board in 2015. Our staff has also worked on a number of statewide general orders. The Aquifer Storage and Recovery General Order that was adopted by the state board in the last year. The state board also formed a waste discharge requirement unit in 2010, and our board and staff have been working with them to update a general statewide order for low-volume domestic facilities. And through our work with them, we're hoping to expand the volume that can be regulated under this order, which would then allow us to put 250 of our facilities under a general order. We've also been working with State Board on developing a composting order, and we're also working to a general order for recycling of ag wastewater. We're also working on a potable drinking water activity general order, which is for surface water, and we're going to propose one for Region 5, but we're also concurrently working with the State Board on developing a statewide order, which we would eventually move our general order into that. The State Board has also initiated efforts to look at the anti-degradation policy review, and Clay Rogers serves as a co-executive sponsor for that project. The approach is to look at developing guidance or plan or other tools to better apply the policy to groundwater. Currently, the only guidance they have is for application of it to surface water, and it doesn't work quite so well for groundwater. Part of the effort is to help be beneficial to implementing the water code as it applies to groundwater with compliance with the anti-degradation. It will be better at addressing the social issues and the economic considerations required under the anti-degradation policy review. The State Board has developed 6 special groups, focused stakeholder groups: the environmental justice organizations, a group for agriculture, including dairies, a group for POTWs or wastewater treatment facilities, a group of water districts and purveyors, underground storage tanks and cleanup, and food processors and wineries. They've been meeting with these groups individually to get feedback from them on the program. This is a high priority project for the State Board, so we expect that to have movement and action on it in the next year. Staff has also been very involved in water management activities for the board, for the state, with the Department of Water Resources and the Delta Stewardship Council. The Water Code, in terms of the California Water Code, the Water Code requires that the Department of Water Resources to update a water plan every 5 years. The water plan presents the status and trends of water in California. The Water Code also specifies that the water plan must incorporate the basin plans, the water quality basin plans. And DWR this time, they're working on their update for the 2013 update, which will be final in 2014, but DWR really reached out to the water boards this time. They are making it so that they better incorporate water quality issues and concerns in the California Water Plan. And our staff has really stepped up to the plate. We've had a lot of involvement in all the 5 volumes that are involved in the plan. The regional reports in particular, we had to do a lot of writing. We have the Sacramento, San Joaquin, and the Tulare Lake regions, and they also overlaid the mountain counties and the Delta area. So we had a lot, Betty Yee in particular, did a lot of writing for the plan on that. In terms of the resource management strategies, we also helped bring in material for that, in particular one for salt and salinity management strategies, but where we could participate and provide expert guidance or expertise, we also provided help in other areas of the strategies. The Delta, one of our highest priorities in the region. We've been very engaged in the Delta and all of the work involved with the Delta Stewardship Council. The Stewardship Council was created in 2009 with legislation, and to achieve the co-equal goals of providing more reliable water supply for water quality while protecting and restoring and enhancing the delta. The legislation also required that they develop a plan that was approved by the Stewardship Council in May. There are a number of recommendations in there that involve the Central Valley Water Board. A number of years ago, we did a 5-year strategic plan for this board that this board approved. That plan is now being updated, and is being updated now to include many of the recommendations within the Delta plan. That will be coming back to the board for its consideration as well. The Delta Stewardship Council also adopted a Delta Science Plan in 2013, and the Science Plan has a recommendation in the plan, in the Delta Plan. And the Science Plan lays out a new interagency structure to foster better communication between scientists, decision makers, and stakeholders, and to provide more reliable funding for scientific investigations in the Delta. And of course, our regional monitoring plan will be involved in that. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan, an extremely controversial item. Our staff has been involved in that and looking at the EIR, providing comments to the EIR, as well as dealing with the permits and certification requirements. We've had a number, moving on to organization, we had a number of activities over the last couple of years. We now have we had two AEOs retire in our Sacramento and Redding office, and we now have two new AEOs, Andrew Altavote in the Sacramento and Clint Snyder in Redding. We've completed our leadership education program over the last year, which was held in all 3 offices and was well received by those who participated. We've had a number of performance improvements over in the last couple of years. We've completed our project management. We now have performance measures that are developed by our program managers and reviewed by the executive management, and now tracked regularly through the EO report and our leadership meetings. And we have developing a portfolio management program, which you'll hear more about next meeting through my EO report with Clint Snyder. We've increased our outreach and access to the public. We've had significantly more workshops over the last couple of years to improve and have the board have better access for the public to the board. We are now moving to improve our video conferencing activities so that we can have more remote meetings, not remote meetings in terms of board meeting, but our video conferencing capabilities have been improved immensely over the last couple of years. And we're also working now to improve our webcasting capabilities so at least the public can at least see the board and hear the board. They may not be able to participate, but at least watch the board. In the next couple of months, we should have wireless network here available in the board office. We're working now to work on website improvements to make it more user-friendly for the public. And we're improving a number of tracking systems, a timber harvest tracking system and an NPDES permit tracking system. In 2011, I provided the board a 5-year projection, which had 13 items. Since that time, we've completed 3 of those 13 with the drinking water policy, the ASR general order, and completion of the leadership education. We've made substantial progress on 6 of those 13. The salt and nitrate management plan, which you'll be hearing about through CV Salts, has had significant progress. Our long-term irrigated lands program will be completed by early spring of this year in 2014. We've eliminated the WDR backlog by 30% and will continue to work on that backlog activity. We now have a formal process in place for the general permit for the municipal stormwater sewer system permits. We now have a very well organized process moving forward for the Delta RMP, and we've made a number of organizational efficiency improvements, which was demonstrated through the amount of work that has been completed by staff to date. For the remaining, our high priority and continued focus, clean drinking water for disadvantaged communities. We've done a number of things through our source control programs to deal with current day sources with our dairy permit and our long-term program. We've worked on the governor's program. We've had a number of SET projects which has allocated money towards wells and other clean water, drinking water programs for some of these disadvantaged communities. Andrew Altavote is working with us to develop a SET program to help fund some of these projects. But we still don't have drinking water for all of our communities, so it's not one I can say we've completed. Our TMDL upstream of the Delta for Mercury, staff will get back on that as soon as the statewide effort is complete. We've been delayed in our new and expanding dairy permit coverage, but we have a process in place that I think we'll be able to start moving on those sooner. And if staff now is completing its activity on getting inspections out of the way and some of our major enforcement activities, let's hope that we will be able to keep our staff focused on permitting. And we will not let remote meeting access die. We'll keep working on that until we have money to do it. So in summary, we have an exceptional and highly qualified technical staff and a superb support staff that have done an outstanding job, and through the help and dedication and experienced executive and leadership team, we've been able to do some outstanding achievements while addressing some extremely complex issues. We've had a significant number of accomplishments, not only in the last 2 years, but in the last number of years by our staff. So I just want to thank staff and the administrative staff, the seniors and supervisors, and the AEOs for all that they do. Without them, I wouldn't be here talking to you for the last hour and a half about what we've done in just the 2 years. And I still have things that I didn't talk about. So thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions or comments.
Any questions or comments? And thank you for an extremely comprehensive report. Go ahead, Bob.
I had a couple comments. First, thank you for a very thorough report. And I'll like to reflect your credit to all the staff and the board that have made that possible. And it was slide 55. You mentioned, or it showed that there were 800 non-discretionary emergency timber applications. That's like over half. And what are those?
Oh, emergency applications. So when we have a fire or something, they need to do clear cutting or the movement of those trees, they come to us for a permit to do those activities.
And there's no review or discretionary look at those, or?
It's not subject to CEQA or NEPA.
Yeah.
But that's why it comes, we do that review. It's not, it's an emergency response.
I mean, I understand that and appreciate that, but I kind of like if just maybe in your EO report, you could characterize that, what that is and what the acreages are.
Sure.
A little better. Thank you. And in your report, it reminded me that on Tuesday, I also went to the California Division of Fish and Wildlife State Wildlife Management Plan meeting. That was their last one in Rancho Cordova here. And a lot of our work interfaces with them, but they're looking at companion plans, and I wanted to make sure that probably somebody from the forestry staff is interfacing with them on the development of the state wildlife management plan, because there's overlap with sediment and streams and water quality.
Can you repeat what the name of that activity was?
It's the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it's their new state wildlife management plan update.
I would be very surprised if we don't have staff involved
I
in
would
that.
be too. I just want to ensure.
But we'll
that
make
there
sure.
are.
I'll report back.
Thank
Okay.
you. Let's see. I wanted to thank you for mentioning the Mercury TMDLs upstream of Delta. You know, that's kind of a special interest. And I wanted to reiterate again how much I appreciate in the EO's report every month you do list the public outreach that our staff does, and it's extensive, and I think it's really helpful to have that recorded in that report. So I wanted you to know that is looked at, and I appreciate it. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Go ahead, John.
Again, thank you for the report. It was, I know it takes a lot of time to put those together, and it takes some time in the board hearing room to sort of walk through it, but it does show the breadth of issues that we do have to face. I have a couple of questions, which I think I'll wait and just ask you. They're probably more in the weeds than we need to. One of I saw the technology at the end, how we're trying to use technology, and I know that's always tough with the state to get contracts through, but with the backlogs and the staffing going down, I'd like to have that discussion as to how we can make ourselves more efficient. The backlog issue on both the WDRs and the NPDESs, I'll circle back on because.
Well, that might be a good discussion for the board.
So,
Well,
question.
you will, the groundwater protection strategy outlined those activities for the WDR program. One thing I forgot to mention was that the state board is also issuing or doing a review of the WDR program, which they were going to do a number of years ago, and that's what started the review of the 9710, the general order from state board. Because, I mean, they're going to do a review, and I already can tell you what they're going to tell us. It's inconsistent. It's done differently by different regional boards. There's no format or process by which we operate under. We're all different, and it's not working well. I can tell you what they're going to say, but we're going to review it. And we said the reason we moved forward with activities was because we knew what the review would say. But we've done that. We've started our own review here. The activities to improve the groundwater program, or the WDR program in particular, it's all outlined in the groundwater protection strategy. But with that said, like I said in the presentation, whenever there's a need for staff, it gets pulled from that group, and so it's difficult to accept that we just can't get everything done. But we've done a great job on what we're doing. NPDES, we also have a strategy in place. I didn't go into much detail, but we can certainly, at a different meeting during an EO report, highlight just what we're doing to address that. So that it's a little. I didn't want to go into that much detail at this level, otherwise we'd be here for 3 hours.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll just wrap up with, if you could send this report to the board members. We didn't have a copy in front of us to take notes, but I certainly want to go through it, and I'll circle back on a few.
I live by different rules, don't I? Sorry.
No problem.
I apologize.
Carl, I wanted to add one thing if I could.
Yes, go ahead, Bob, and then
I
Jenny.
appreciated a little bit of the update on the Delta Stewardship Council and the BDCP, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. But is that going to come to us? Could we just get an update on what's going on
Sure.
with our working with that at one of the next board meetings?
Sure, certainly.
The informational item.
That is also part of the EO report. I asked staff to bring it up, but yeah, it's about time for that. Okay.
First off, I just wanted to thank you. This is my first State of the Region report. I hadn't been appointed yet to the previous one. So I appreciated that. Certainly it's, you say there's more that's not included, but it seems very all-encompassing to me. And it's clear that staff has been working quite hard over the past couple of years. So thank you for that, and thank you to staff for filling in all the stuff that you've presented. I do have a question about the backlog of WDRs and NPDES permits. It's more of a, I guess, just a question. What does it mean for those permittees if they're part of that backlog? Do they not get to move forward with their project? If it's a renewal, do they just keep their previous one until we get to it? How does that work?
For NPDES, if they get, under the federal law, if they provide us with a complete report of waste, just a complete application, and we deem it's complete, and we can administratively extend the permit so it doesn't expire until we renew it. For WDRs, those are under the California Water Code, and the Water Code puts a timeline on the water board, but they have to submit a complete application and demonstration of CEQA, and if we don't meet they meet that timeline for issuance of a permit, and they've met those requirements, they can proceed with their project. If that's the case, usually staff is engaged with the discharger. The discharger works with us, and they do implement the measures that they would most likely see in an order. And sometimes we issue separate orders, like 13267 or whatever we can, have them do monitoring while they're moving forward. We do have a number where we don't have complete applications, and so those are the ones that are more problematic. They're the ones that usually complain that we're sitting on their permit, but we can't seem to get the information from them sometimes to issue an order. And with anti-degradation, there's a lot of information they have to supply us for us to write a permit. If it's an existing WDR, it doesn't expire, so they can continue to operate. They just can't expand or whatnot until they get a new order from the board.
Okay, and so in those cases, if a community has received, let's say, redevelopment funding or something that might expire, and we have a backlog, is there any chance that
We,
communities might lose out on funding opportunities?
Well, we look in part of our prioritization project. We look at that. So some of that is, do they need the project for, will we harm them if they don't have a permit? So that moves them to the top of the PES machine, and they're next. And sometimes it's someone calls the squeaky wheel. It's sad to say that if you're really bugging us a lot, we handle it. And they go higher up the food chain. It really is bothersome when the EO calls saying, "What's the matter? Where's the permit?" Or the chair, or one of the board members. So it's we're getting better at it, but we'll have an update to the board on what we do. But we try not to harm, and I can't say we're 100%. We get them all, but we try not to harm industry or a community from moving forward.
Okay, and then I have one, thank you for that. And then I have one last question. You mentioned that the state is, there's a couple statewide general orders that I'm curious about. One is a general order for recycling of ag wastewater. What is that? What does that mean? Would that replace ILRP? I mean,
Oh,
what
no,
do you
no,
consider
no,
as wastewater from ag?
I'm looking to Ken.
At this point, there is a statewide order if you are taking recycled water from a sewage treatment plant and irrigating landscape.
Okay.
There is not one if you're irrigating crops. So they're looking, and obviously in the Central Valley, crop irrigation is a very good use of a lot of recycled water. So they're looking at adopting an order, a general order for that purpose.
And it would be specifically from wastewater treatment plants?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a reclamation order.
Okay.
In fact, just about every waste treatment plant in the Terry Lake Basin goes to land, and much of that goes to irrigation. So I guess we've been operating without this for a long, long time.
Well, we've handled it in individual waste discharge requirements.
And you're looking for a general order.
Right.
Make it easier.
Yeah.
Just like the general landscape order by the state board. And usually what happens with some of these we start the work on a region-wide, and Tom Howard or someone would say, that's a great idea for statewide. And then it just it just moves it to a whole different level.
Those are all my questions I have. Thank you so much.
Well, what really impresses me about the general orders is they cut down on paperwork, or it would seem to me that they do, and it takes the timelines out on having, if a discharge is doing a good job, you don't have to come back every 5 years. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, it cuts down the amount of work we have to develop the individual orders. They don't have to wait to get adopted at the board. Usually we can do that administratively. So it cuts our workload down, and it makes our permitting more responsive.
The issue that it's time consuming because of anti-degradation and CEQA requirements for general orders. Under the waste discharge requirements under the California Water Code, we're subject to CEQA.
But it also can.
Under the federal,
Right.
we're not subject to CEQA.
But it also can reply and it can't. It also makes it easier also for the discharger if they're doing a good job.
Yes. Ultimately, it's a good thing. It just takes a little more time.
Any further?
Yeah,
Yes, I'm sorry, Sandra.
that's okay. I want to thank you and, of course, all the staff. And this is the first time for me to pay attention, really. It wasn't, the word is boring. It wasn't. It's very educational, very well done. And I am really glad to see that in all these years, I'll say 7 because I've been here almost 7, that you've done a lot of work. But for me, it's one of the things where you have included the disadvantaged communities and the environmental organizations to come in and be heard, and your priorities are all over the place. But sometimes and I'll say people like staff and yourself and others, they don't realize the work that's done. Hearing this hour or 2 hours has, I think, shown the Region 5 communities and organizations and businesses the work that you do. And I am really proud to say that I have learned a lot of, I know I'm here, but to hear it in such a way, and it is a lot of work. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? If not, then, and by the way, next year when you present this, I expect it to be set to music.
So I can really put you to sleep?
Okay, the next item on the agenda is item 10, but we're going to take a break. Please be back in here 5 after.
I had a thought, Carl. This is with staff too on timing. Is the other item, which we have a lot of the public for, would be the Jackson item number 12. And I'm wondering if we want to move that up and do that right after lunch.
This item will probably, we'll break on this item. And
Okay.
let's talk with Pamela on Jackson. Ken, Bob had suggested we move Jackson up. Pardon? To query the people for item 12, Jackson, are in the audience. Do you wish to speak?
Briefly. Very briefly.
Are you Mike Daly, sir? You're the city manager. Good. What we'll do is we can move Jackson very quickly and you can go home. And let me go to item 12 here. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider renewal of the NPDES permit, amendment of an existing time schedule order, and adoption of a new time schedule order for the city Jackson wastewater treatment plant in Amador County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Seeing none, we will go to the, well, since there's no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials and the record, but I'll give you a couple of minutes, sir, to say what you have to say. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
Yes, there are some late revisions.
Okay.
We have one late revision to the fact sheet. We just added an authorized signator. You should have those revisions in front of you.
Exactly. Okay.
And the second late revision is the response to comments. We revised a concentration in the response to comments.
Adam, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Adam Lapitz, supervising engineer, Rancho Cordova office.
Thank you. Does council have any legal issues?
No legal issues.
Here. There you are. Okay. Very good. Thank you, David. Mr. Daly, you wish to make your statement? Yes, go ahead. Introduce yourself and.
There we go. Okay. My name is Mike Daly, City Manager for City of Jackson, and I've been working on this permit for many, many, many years, and we're very happy that it's moved along nicely. We've got great cooperation from all levels of staff here at the regional board, and we appreciate that very much. We understand that we're kind of an unusual issue because of discharging into Jackson Creek, which goes down to Lake Amador, and the Jackson Valley Irrigation District down there. And we're doing everything we can, I think, to make sure that that water is protected to the level it needs to be. And that's really about it. I just wanted to thank everybody for all of their time and effort working with us on this, and look forward to moving forward with the project.
Well, we thank you very much, sir, for your comments. The hearing's now closed. The chair will now entertain a motion to renew the NPDES permit, amend the existing time schedule order, and adopt a new time schedule order, and this is a voice vote.
I make that motion with the late revisions.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Bob's moved, Jenny seconded. All in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Let's move on to agenda item number 10. All I have to do is find it. This is the time and place for hearing to consider renewal of the conditions under which the Central Valley Regional Board will waive the submission of reports of waste discharge and adoption of waste discharge requirements for specific types of discharge. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time. Raise your right hand and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Thank you. The designated parties are the California Independent Petroleum Association, the Western States Petroleum Association, and the Center for Biological Diversity. The total times allowed for testimony and cross-examination are as follows. The California Independent Petroleum Association and the Western States Petroleum Association have a combined 30 minutes. The Center for Biological Diversity has 15 minutes. All other persons are interested persons and shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes. Timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you have taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
Just one at this time. The SIPA and WISPA individuals have asked to introduce some materials into the record as a rebuttal evidence and have asked to present an expert testimony as rebuttal expert testimony today, and they seek to qualify an expert witness. Now, ordinarily, our evidentiary deadline is contained in the hearing procedure itself, and we hold pretty firm to that deadline. In this case, the board made changes to the order after the comments were submitted. Some of these changes were made in response to some comments that were submitted by the Center for Biological Diversity, and SIPA and WISPA are asking now to introduce some evidence to rebut CBD's contentions. Now, this evidence, I've taken a quick look at it. It generally, some of this is actually in our files already, and it certainly qualifies as rebuttal evidence here. So my recommendation is to allow this into the record, but we will, my suggestion also is to allow both the SIPA, WISPA attorney and the Center for Biological Diversity attorney to weigh in with a short statement as to what their opinion is in terms of getting this into the record.
I hear you. I am typically don't allow changes to the deadlines, if you will. And you're saying at this point in time that really the hearing procedure precludes that. Is that correct?
The regulations that govern our hearings generally don't require pre-submission of rebuttal testimony. That can be changed when the hearing notice or the hearing procedure itself contains an explicit deadline for rebuttal testimony. In this case, our general WDRs or waiver hearing notice doesn't contain that type of evidentiary deadline. So ordinarily, we wouldn't require this to be submitted ahead of time.
Right, and I have some issues with the hearing procedures in general. I think that we need an item in front of the board directed to hearing procedures, and we need to come to a board decision on what we're going to be doing on these. Yes, John?
So I guess I would want to hear the attorney's position on this, but if there was a substantive change since the notice deadline came and went, you know, I I would lean towards accepting the testimony.
I would as well. You know, the inability to introduce some rebuttal testimony could be determined to be prejudicial in certain instances. I can't say for sure whether that would be the case here, but I would suggest hearing some from the designated parties' attorneys.
Thank you, and please make note of the fact that I'd like hearing procedures discussed in front of the board as a generic item. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. With that said, we will we'll now begin with testimony by staff.
Or before we should determine the matter of whether this gets into the record or not. If it's the board's pleasure, we can allow the SIPA-WISPA attorney a minute to comment and the CBD attorney a minute to comment on this, and then the board can make a determination as to whether these files get into the evidence.
Well, what you're telling me is that it's not precluded by the hearing procedure.
It's not.
And so that really doesn't give the chair or the board much discretion, as I understand.
Ordinarily, no. If there is an objection to this, it should be on the record at this point in time. So if CBD is interested in making an objection, now's the time to do it.
Okay. Is there an objection? Who's here for Center for Biological Diversity? Could you please come to the microphone and introduce yourself?
Good morning, board members. My name is Holland Kretzman. I'm an attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity, and I would like to formally object to the late introduction of the expert witness and this written testimony submission that we've just been handed a few minutes ago. I think it's extremely prejudicial to my client. We found out about the witness on Monday for the first time after we were told that deadline had passed for finding experts and submitting written testimony. That left us with just 3 days to prepare for a cross-examination and attempt to find an expert of our own, which we were unable to do.
Now, let me interrupt. As I understand it, this is a rebuttal witness. Is that correct?
It's a rebuttal expert witness to rebut the information contained in the Center for Biological Diversity.
It'd be more clear-cut if it was an expert witness per se.
If this information was brand new, if it wasn't a rebuttal, I would strongly be urging the board to keep it out of the record. Here, it's a little different situation because it is rebuttal testimony here.
I thought we had a case a while ago similar to this where we didn't allow the new witness. And I mean, it's an expert witness, and I'm not sure what difference when you introduce a new witness, whether they're you know, the primary witness or rebuttal witness. There's still, all of a sudden, there's a new expert introduced to it. And you always get to cross-examine even a rebuttal witness, and if you don't have any information about that ahead of time, then it becomes presidential. That's kind of prejudicial. That seems to be my opinion on it.
And that's kind of mine, and I would prefer to rule that way, but I'm hearing from Patrick that the hearing procedure doesn't provide for this. With that said,
Well,
we can make the decision.
Yeah, but it did say that no new witnesses after a certain date in the notice that we did. And it seems like if we issue a notice, I mean, we can do this, but we issued a pretty clear notice, and it seems we ought to stick with our notice.
If I can interject as well, I disagree with the characterization that it is rebuttal testimony. I think
Sir, I think we've heard from you already. I'm prepared to rule that we are not going to accept the rebuttal witness. Before I so rule, is there any comment on that decision by members of the board?
If I could make one comment, just in terms of what the difference is between the item that we heard at the last board meeting where we excluded a witness, that was an ACL proceeding which has very explicit deadlines in the hearing procedure and hearing notice for rebuttal testimony.
But it was the general process we're following. Yes, I understand.
Yeah, difference here is...
I'm ready to rule. Are there any comments on my ruling from board members?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the other side.
Yes.
My name is Meg Rosegay, and I represent WISPA and SIPA in this matter. Excuse me, okay. So the comments that precipitated the need for our rebuttal testimony came in on November the 4th. That was the last day of an extended comment period. The public notice that went out to WISPA and SIPA, and upon which they submitted timely comments within the original comment period, proposed to renew the waiver for drilling sumps. It was only after the submittal of comments by CBD and various exhibits to their comment letter that brought up this issue that led the staff to reverse the recommendation and to propose to now deny the waiver as to drilling sumps. So WISPA and SIPA had no opportunity at all within the comment period to provide any rebuttal or response to an issue that was first brought up on the last day of the comment period and which precipitated a complete about-face in the recommendation that staff is bringing to the board today. Therefore, I believe under the regulations that we have a right to rebuttal, and the documents that we're submitting are simply in support of that rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you. My proposal stands, but I want to hear if there's objections.
Well, I would object that, and you know, I'd look to Patrick to what it means if we don't allow the rebuttal witness, because as we just heard, there was a significant change in direction, and it was based on the letter, or I'm assuming that that's what we'll hear, is that it's based on the letter that came in, and so from a process point of view, you know, I think there's a fairness argument there for sure.
It does appear to me as this is what they are proposing and asking to do is bring forward rebuttal. So I would support listening to their expert witness.
There's another direction we can go, and we can discuss this after we hear testimony, but another way to go is to go ahead and include them in the waiver, but bring them back the next board meeting for consideration for revised waiver. But we can consider that as we go down the line. So I've heard from two board members one way. How do you feel, Sandra?
I think we should go the way you just said. Bring them back to the next board meeting.
Well, we have to discuss that down the road.
Well, that's what I mean.
Okay.
What we are talking about right now is whether this material gets admitted into the record or not. So that's something that we do have to decide at the start of this hearing.
I thought you said most of the substantial amount of this material was already in the record.
Of the 5 documents that came forward, one of them is already in the record. One of them is a actual rebuttal to one of the documents that CBD introduced as an attachment to their comment letter. And the 2 other documents are DTSC memoranda that one goes back to 1982 and addresses some of the drilling sumps issue, and the other is a document entitled Oil Exploration and Production Waste Initiative. So this information is generally been out there in the public sphere. You know, again, I don't think it would necessarily, I think it would be more prejudicial to keep this information out than to allow it into the record. And I from my initial review, I don't know, I doubt this information would change our recommendation at this point. You know, to allow the expert witness to elaborate, you know, we want to get his CV into the file right here. Again, that's the board's determination to make, but it's something that we should do at the onset of the hearing.
So you were clear that you think that we should go ahead and allow this?
I am clear in saying that I believe this is rebuttal. It is, our regulations strongly suggest that we include rebuttal, particularly in circumstances that are described here today. We extended the comment period and the changes were made very, very late in the process. If this evidence is excluded, they would have, or SIPA and WISPA would have no evidence in there to counterbalance some of the information contained in the CBD comment letter.
Carl, I'm going to have to go with our attorney's recommendation.
Well, having heard from the board members and heard from our counsel, who I have great respect for, we'll go ahead and allow that testimony in.
Carl, I have another. John, when you met with the oil folks, was it about this issue or around, or what was that about?
So I met with Blair Knox of SIPA twice. Once was before the notice deadline, at which point it was completely informational that the waiver was being renewed, and there was no ask. It was just informational. There was a subsequent meeting we had after the recommendation had switched and after they were told that staff was going in a different direction. And again, it was an informational item of what staff had proposed. So it was directly related to this item. One was before the notice, one was after.
Yeah, that concerns me. Is there any legal opinion on that?
This is very similar to, the water code changed very recently to allow ex parte contacts in this particular circumstance when we're adopting a general order or a general waiver that doesn't name individual dischargers. So very similar to the briefings that you may have gotten for the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, where industry representatives could talk to you. What would ordinarily be an ex parte contact has been defined by the Water Code to not be an ex parte contact in this particular circumstance. Because this is a general order, they are allowed to contact the board members and discuss some of the items of concern in the proposed general order or general waiver.
Yeah, and just for the record, I was contacted, but I did not speak with or meet with the representatives.
I would note that there's been because of the late changes and some of the deadlines, what we've been discussing internally and what we will be proposing is to discuss this matter much in the same way that we will discuss the hearing procedure matter at another board meeting, to have a board dialogue about what type of limitations the board wants to put on those type of contacts in the context of general orders and general waivers. And I think that it would be worthwhile to have that protracted discussion at a subsequent board meeting.
Yeah, that's fine. It's difficult for me because, this differential of information is always important. And the perceptions, there's these legal issues, but there's also these perceptions of what's fair. And we're in a semi-judicial situation here. And when one party has had the opportunity to meet with board members and the other party, for whatever reason, isn't, or you get those differentials set up in that dynamic, then people with time or the resources tend to meet, and that just gets to be more difficult in making fair decisions. So
Part of our
that's my
quest
take
to
on that.
part of our quest to maintain a level playing field for everybody. Very good. If there is no further discussion on this, we'll now begin testimony by staff.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. I'm Stephen Klein, a Water Resource Control Engineer in your Fresno office, and I have taken the oath. I'm here today along with Assistant Executive Officer Clay Rogers to present to you a resolution to renew the Central Valley Region's general waiver for low-threat discharges to land. The general waiver does not cover surface water discharges, and in fact, the Clean Water Act does not allow NPDES permits to be waived. This presentation will provide a discussion of waivers and the role they play at the Water Board, a brief history of the general waiver, including information on why we are here today, a discussion of the waiver renewal process, a short discussion of drilling muds and their importance in the drilling process and the differences between oil and gas drilling muds and freshwater well drilling muds, a review of comments received onto the tentative general waiver circulated for public comment, proposed revisions in response to the public comments, and we will conclude with a summary and recommendation. Ordinarily, when a discharger is proposing to discharge waste, the discharger must first file a report of waste discharge and obtain waste discharge requirements, or WDRs. However, some discharges that is, do not pose a significant threat to water quality. For these discharges, the board can waive the discharger's obligation to submit a report of waste discharge or obtain WDRs. The Water Code allows the board to waive waste discharge requirements if the discharge is consistent with the basin plan and if the issuance of the waiver is in the public interest. These waivers are conditional and may be terminated by the board at any time. In addition, the term of the waiver cannot exceed 5 years and must be renewed to continue. In March 1982, the Central Valley Water Board conditionally waived waste discharge requirements for 23 categories of discharge. This waiver remained in effect until changes in the Water Code resulted in automatic expiration of all waivers in 2003. When the board reviewed its general waiver in 2003, it chose to only renew 12 of the original 23 discharge categories. In December 2008, the board renewed the 2003 general waiver with only minor modifications. The board has found that waiving requirements for low-threat discharges is in the public interest because this allows board resources to be directed to discharges that have a greater potential to degrade water quality or create nuisance conditions. The 5-year period for the 2008 waiver ended yesterday. The bullets on this slide and the next slide list the waiver categories covered by the 2008 general waiver. I'm not going to talk about each of the categories, but if you have any questions, we will be happy to answer them. Staff is proposing that the board renew the waiver with the elimination of drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas activities. Details on why staff is proposing modification to the drilling muds and boring waste waiver category are discussed later in the presentation. Discharges associated with waiver categories occur throughout the Central Valley on a regular basis. But the board determined that they do not threaten to impact water quality. Regulating these discharges under traditional WDRs would require substantial staff resources and would not result in any significant water quality benefits. It is also important to know that if a discharge does not meet the waiver conditions, then the discharger would need to submit a report of waste discharge or seek coverage under an existing regulatory program. The general waiver is only intended to cover the discharges that represent the lowest threat to water quality. When preparing the proposed draft waiver, we reviewed all the activities covered by the waiver. With only one exception, these discharges have not changed in any meaningful way and have not caused any identified water quality impacts. The exception was the discharge of drilling muds and boring waste associated with the oil and gas development listed on the previous slide. Board staff had concerns that the waiver conditions for the drilling muds and boring waste in the 2008 general waiver might not be enough to protect water quality. Oil and gas development in the Central Valley has increased since 2008. We have also seen an increased use in advanced drilling technologies and increases in drilling outside of existing oil fields. Therefore, we initially proposed to add additional conditions where groundwater is vulnerable to salinity impacts. However, when these proposed changes were circulated for public review, we received comments that caused us to reconsider the adequacy of our earlier environmental review associated with oil and gas drilling muds. As a result of these comments, which I will be covering later in this presentation, we removed drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development from the drilling mud waiver category. No negative comments were received for any of the other proposed waiver categories. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Clay Rogers, who will be discussing drilling muds.
Hello, my name is Clay Rogers, and I'm an Assistant Executive Officer in your Fresno office, and I have taken the oath. I want to talk to you about the use of unlined mud sumps commonly employed during drilling of oil wells in the Central Valley. The Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, or commonly referred to as the DOGGR, reports that about 3,000 new oil and gas-filled wells were drilled during 2012 in the Central Valley, with the vast majority of that activity occurring in Kern County and within identified oil fields. Based on a review of information from the DOGGR yesterday, it appears that the number of oil wells drilled during 2013 will actually increase to somewhere in the order of 4,000. Drilling of each well, I should have advanced the slide. Drilling of each well employs drilling mud. The picture on the right is typical of many wells drilled in the Central Valley with a pad of several acres in size, the rig centrally located on the pad, and a mud sump adjacent to the rig. I will talk more about the mud system on the following slide. Drilling mud is a critical part of the drilling operation. This is a simplified schematic of a mud system employed during drilling. First, as the drill bit turns and digs the hole, cuttings are produced and the drill mud carries these cuttings to the surface where the coarser grain material is removed and the drill mud is pumped back down the hole. The mud is a liquid that has to be thick enough to carry the cuttings out of the hole and thin enough to be easily pumped. The primary components of the mud are water and bentonite clay. Because there is a lot of friction during the drilling, the mud also cools the bit, which extends the life that the bit will function properly. In oil well drilling, the mud is typically weighted to provide hydrostatic head should a high pressurized zone be encountered. This increase in density is typically accomplished by adding the mineral barite. Fluid flow is also controlled by forming a mud cake on the side of the borehole walls and also helps to stabilize the borehole to reduce sloughing and prevent collapse. On an oil well location, the mud is typically stored in a series of tanks and an excavated mud sump. The mud sump is used to store any excess mud and is the storage for the cuttings that are separated out of the drill mud by the shale shaker. This is a picture of a close-up view of a drill rig with a relatively small mud sump. The mud flows out of the borehole and across the shale shaker that's there by the red arrow, where the coarse grain cuttings are screened and directed down the slide to the sump. The mud flows through the screen and drops into the tanks for reuse. The mud sump serves as overflow and again where the cuttings produced during drilling are directed. There is white plastic on the rig side of the sump. This is not there as a liner to protect water quality, but is there to reduce infiltration of liquids on that side of the sump that would potentially endanger the rig and components of the rig and rig personnel if failure of the sump wall occurred. One of the issues we have is that we have not historically tracked oil well drilling activities in the Central Valley. Recently, staff in Fresno issued 78 orders under Section 13267 of the Water Code to oil and gas producing companies requiring submittal of information about drilling activities since January 1 of 2012. The information requested includes well locations and whether mud sumps were used during drilling, and if so, how the sumps were closed. This should help staff to better understand the practices being employed by the oil industry and assist in our future review of how to regulate these mud sumps to ensure protection of water quality. I want to spend just a minute talking about the difference between drilling an oil well and drilling a water supply well, since only mud sumps associated with petroleum production are being proposed for removal from the waiver. There can be significant differences between oil and gas drilling muds and fresh water supply well drilling muds that make oil and gas muds more of a threat to water quality. The characteristics and additives to drilling muds are dependent on the materials being drilled through. In both oil and gas and fresh water wells, where the upper parts of the borehole encounter fresh water, the drilling muds typically have a low salinity. Freshwater wells are not typically drilled below the base of fresh water. However, oil and gas wells drilled below the base of fresh water use saline muds in most instances. In a review of information received regarding an oil well drilled last year, the salinity in that mud was achieved by adding 2 to 4% by weight of potassium chloride, a salt, resulting in a salinity very near that of seawater. Since most of the petroleum deposits within the Central Valley occur in sediments deposited under marine conditions, they contain trapped seawater, and drilling muds used to drill these materials typically have a similar salinity. Casing is required to the base of fresh water to seal these zones off from saline fluids and petroleum that may be encountered with the deeper drilling. I also want to mention that in water supply wells, the mud sumps are there usually a much shorter amount of time because the drilling is much shallower, and therefore they're there for a shorter amount of time. What we've seen in the oil industry is we get these deep wells that are 10,000 feet in excess many times, is that those mud sumps can be there over an extended period of time. We've seen some centralized locations where mud sumps are repeatedly used for more than one well, so that these sumps in place in certain areas are actually there for a matter of months and not just there for a week or two. Some of the oil-containing formations in the eastern part of the valley near Bakersfield contain fresh water, and drilling muds used to drill those areas would typically not be saline. But even in these areas, it's anticipated that petroleum hydrocarbons could be discharged to the mud sump during drilling, posing a potential threat to water quality. With that, I'll turn the presentation back to Stephen Klein.
Written comments were received from, on the tentative general waiver from the Center of Biological Diversity, CBD, and combined comments from the California Independent Petroleum Association, SIPA, and Western States Petroleum Association, WISPA. No negative comments were received for any of the other proposed waiver categories. In addition, 2 letters supportive of the waiver were received. One was for the residual waste to land as a soil amendment waiver category, and the other was for the agricultural commodity waste waiver category. CBD objected to inclusion of drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development under the proposed waiver. Specifically, CBD stated that drilling muds are not suitable for a waiver program because of the potential health and environmental risks. CBD indicated that impacts of new oil and gas extraction techniques have not been adequately assessed. CBD also indicated that prior environmental review was not adequate based on recent widespread use of horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and acidization. CBD also contends that conditions in the waiver were not adequate to protect water quality, and the lack of monitoring and reporting requirements limits the board's ability to have proper oversight of drilling mud discharges associated with oil and gas development. In response, we do not agree with all CBD's comments. For example, drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development could be regulated under a waiver program if the board included conditions that would ensure compliance with the board's basin plan. CBD is correct that the board has not recently studied potential environmental effects of changed practices in the oil and gas industry. However, hydraulic fracturing fluids or other well stimulation fluids have never been allowed under the drilling mud waiver category and was not in the tentative general waiver circulated for public comment. We are now proposing to remove drilling muds associated with oil and gas development from the proposed waiver. We plan on addressing the issues raised by CBD when we develop a new general order or general waiver to cover drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development. This process will begin immediately after this board meeting concludes. In addition, where this leaves the oil and gas industry, Clay Rogers will be discussing the alternatives available to them a bit later in the presentation. We are proposing to renew waiver coverage for drilling muds from freshwater wells because we do not have any evidence that these discharges have impacted water quality in any way, and freshwater well drilling practices have not changed. And unlike drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development, no one introduced evidence or studies that would cause us to reconsider our earlier environmental assessment.
Steve,
Yes.
when you talk about a waiver, you're talking then probably about a conditional waiver, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Which, by the way, can be very, very onerous. It's not a free ride. Just like we encountered in the Irrigated Lands Program, a lot of the press and others thought that it was a free ride, that nothing was required, but conditional waivers can be extremely restrictive on operations. It's a permit.
Correct.
And it's unfortunate that they go by the name waiver. Thank you.
SIPA and WISPA initially commented that conditions in the 2008 general waiver were adequate to protect water quality and that no additional conditions were necessary. Their comments express concern over potential redundant regulatory oversight and point out that new regulatory requirements have been imposed by the Dogger on the operation of drilling mud sumps since the adoption of the previous waiver in 2008. However, SIP and WISPA concluded that based on their work with board staff and despite the added cost and regulatory burden, the general waiver circulated for public comment represented a reasonable compromise and was workable for the industry. In response to SIPA and WISPA's comments, we would point out that Dogger's regulations include general siting criteria and operating conditions. They do not have specific water quality protection standards. The Water Board is party to a memorandum of agreement with the Dogger to eliminate duplication of effort and coordinate permitting and enforcement activities between the two state agencies. Regulation of discharges to land is recognized in the MOA as being a Water Board function working in coordination with Dogger. As mentioned in the board staff's response to the Center for Biological Diversity, we have included drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development. We have excluded them from the drilling muds waiver category. The version of the general waiver contained in your agenda packet only allows waiver of drilling muds from freshwater supply wells. Concerns about oil and gas drilling muds may best be addressed by a separate board action, which will consider other regulations, including those from Dogger. With that, I'll turn the rest of the presentation over to Clay Rogers.
Clay Rogers again. If waiver coverage for drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development ends, as staff has proposed, there is potential to impact the oil industry. As previously mentioned, roughly 3,000 oil and gas wells were drilled in 2012, and it looks like about 4,000 in 2013. Based on there is not necessarily a sump for every well drilled, but we know that there are a significant number of sumps. We know there is a need to have an option to minimize the impact of this regulatory action. There is a general order that can cover these activities while a long-term regulatory program for this is developed. Discharges of drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas development can apply for coverage under a general order adopted by the State Water Board. The statewide general order applies to low-threat discharges and includes a category for drilling muds. To obtain coverage under the statewide general order, the discharger needs to file a notice of intent or an NOI and submit it with some supporting documents, including a map, to the Central Valley Water Board, along with the applicable fee of a little over $1,900. Staff can then process the notice of intent, and the executive officer could issue a notice of applicability if it's demonstrated that it can comply with the conditions of the general order. This is done administratively and does not require a separate action from the board. It is important to note that the statewide general order allows only discharge of drilling fluids. Discharge of well stimulation, waste such as those associated with hydraulic fracturing or acidization are not allowed under this order and would be a violation. We have already received a significant number of notices of intent seeking coverage under the State Board General Order, anticipating that the action today could be to approve the proposed waiver as proposed. Excuse me. And yesterday, 13 notices of applicability were issued to operations on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley under that general order. Those operations are in areas underlain by poor quality water, and they were issued by two operators covering an oil field. Since drilling activities within a field are similar, we've bunched them together instead of a separate notice of applicability for each individual well or a notice of intent. We've lumped them together and told the oil industry that their notices of intent can include a number of wells within an oil field where their activities are similar, and therefore their discharges would be similar. The 13 notices of applicability issued yesterday cover the drilling of about 1,600 planned wells through the end of 2014, and we have received additional notices of intent and are anticipating the issuance of additional notices of applicability over the next few days as staff reviews and confirms that they're in compliance with the general order. The oil and gas industry also has other options. For instance, they may discharge the drilling muds to above ground tanks and take the muds to a centralized handling facility for reuse or disposal. If they choose this option, no disposal of drilling mud would occur at the drilling site and no permit would be needed. This is already done typically in offshore areas and certainly in any drilling that's offshore and also in urban areas, such as in Los Angeles where land is at a premium. The use of tanks is a more expensive option because of rental or purchase of the tanks, and they also have to deal with the disposal of the drilling muds and the cuttings at the end of that operation. We understand the importance of having a long-term regulatory program that can adequately meet the needs of industry while having conditions that are protective of water quality. Work on a long-term option has already begun, assuming that the waiver is adopted as proposed. We anticipate a stakeholder process inclusive of both environmental groups and industry as we move through that process. Results of working on the long-term option will inform staff as to the appropriate vehicle to regulate this activity. We do not know at this time whether staff will be recommending to the board that land discharge of drilling muds and boring waste be covered by a conditional waiver, a general order, or some other regulatory vehicle. In summary, contained in your agenda package is the proposed conditional waiver, which includes the same categories as the 2008 conditional waiver, with the removal of drilling muds and boring waste associated with oil and gas drilling activities. Staff recommends adoption of the proposed waiver resolution as presented in your package, with the anticipation that we will perform this long-term review, do the required environmental analysis to consider the options, and then come back to you as soon as we have those activities completed to present to you a complete regulatory approach for how to regulate this particular type of activity. This concludes our presentation. I would like to enter this presentation and the regional board files into the record, and we are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Clay. Question, so if we were to adopt the waiver today and not include the oil industry, how does that impact oil drilling operations until we approve something down the road?
Well, as I mentioned during the presentation, we are actively working, staff has met with industry over the past few weeks because we knew this was going to be a significant issue. And we've worked with the industry to identify, even propose to them the information they would need to provide to give us a complete notice of intent. We've drafted up kind of a templated notice of applicability so that when staff determines that a notice of intent for activities is in compliance with that general order, that we can go ahead and quickly issue a notice of applicability so we don't end up in the situation where we have large amounts of activities that do not have regulatory coverage.
But what if they have some of those other materials that are used? You mentioned acids and other materials used in the drilling operation.
Well, those discharges would not be allowed even if the waiver were continued the way it's proposed. Discharges of well stimulation fluids from hydraulic fracturing or stimulation, those have never been considered drilling fluids because in order for those activities to occur, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail this afternoon, but since the question's brought up, you have to get all the drilling mud out of the hole before you do your hydraulic fracturing operation, because if you apply high pressure to drilling mud enough to fracture the rock, you would force the bentonite clay into the fractures and therefore plug up the very fractures that would help to remove the oil or the gas from the formation. So you have to have clear liquids that don't have any fine-grained materials in the borehole when you're doing those stimulation activities. So
Thank
they
you.
would never be considered drilling fluids.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
I have a question about the salt. You said that they use 2 to 4% weight by salt, or by weight of salt.
Well, the one we had an action where we decided we needed to get a lot more information about a drilling activity that had occurred. And so we asked for specific information under an order issued under Water Code Authority. And during that, they informed us that, they had added 2 to 4% potassium chloride to increase the salinity of the muds. So it is an imported salt, and that's one of the things started to give us concern because, one, we don't want to see the salts imported into the basin and then have them leach out of the mud sumps, particularly where these last for a very long time. And we also want to look at part of our evaluation about how these are closed, because many of them are closed with the material actually left in place. There is a solidification process, but what we want to see is how good does that do at preventing any future leaching, and do we need to have additional conditions or requirements that if that material is left in place ensures that we don't see leaching of that material to where it actually gets into the basin. And since the vast majority of this drilling, 95% of the drilling in the state probably goes on in Kern County. It's part of the Tulare Lake Basin. We're in a closed basin where the salts continue to accumulate. Salts are one of our greatest long-term threat to the beneficial uses of water. Fortunately, most of these activities are on the west side where we're underlain by already poor quality, naturally occurring poor quality water. They're already in marine formations, and these activities would not be a significant threat. But what we need to do is evaluate where those lines are, do the environmental review, and determine an appropriate regulatory vehicle. And that's what we're proposing to do, and then come back to you.
Great, thank you.
Clay, are there any other proprietary chemicals that are used in these mixes, or is it just bentonite and barite that you mentioned?
I'm sure there are other chemicals that are added. That's some of the information we're trying to work on about what is added. Because we don't know all of the chemicals that are included. Certainly the primary components are water, bentonite clay, and then the barite to overcome the, any hydraulic pressure in combination with blowout preventers on the rig. There are other chemicals that are added. We don't know exactly what all of those are. And that's part of the information that we want to review so we get a better handle on what are the potential waste constituents and what could potentially leach out of one of these sumps.
I should say I do have in my background a little bit of information on wells because I worked for California Division of Oil and Gas some 40 years ago, I think, for a very short period of time. The solidification process is, what's that mean?
Well, typically what they do when they close the sumps, and perhaps the expert from the oil industry will get up here in a couple minutes and correct me, but
That's why I like to
my
ask the question now so everybody
my
has an
understanding is that, you know, they go in and they pump out the liquids. They will treat some of those liquids. It may be deep well injected once they remove the fines. There are some centralized facilities for the disposal of drilling muds within the oil fields. And then they go through, there is a common process called the Solabond process where they basically mix material into it that solidifies it so that, you know, you can place a couple feet of fill over it and then you can drive across it. One of the questions we have now is how good is that at preventing any future leaching, particularly depending upon what the future activities are on top of it. For instance, if it's an abandoned well site and they go in and plant agricultural crops on top of it and irrigate it, what we want to see is that that material, you know, we wouldn't leach large volumes of salt out of it that could be a potential threat to water quality.
I have one other question is if we follow staff's recommendation on this, then after our studies and stuff, if there was a conclusion that, yeah, okay, we're comfortable with this, then we could decide to put it back into this waiver.
That is exactly right, you know, is that we certainly are not ruling out the use of a conditional waiver to regulate these. In the work that we had done, we thought that a large number of the wells currently being used probably are suitable for use as a conditional waiver, but we want to go through and do that review to actually evaluate what the circumstances are and then come back to you and present to you a more formalized approach about how we treat these. And it may well be some kind of tiered approach that the wells of certain types in certain areas are not a threat to water quality and therefore use of a conditional waiver is appropriate, or perhaps wells of a certain type in a different area may pose a threat and should be regulated differently.
So this recommendation is kind of the due diligence cautionary approach to water quality.
Yes, it is. Particularly since we do have another option to bring them and provide regulatory coverage for these activities during the interim period. If that state board general order were not there, we would probably, we could potentially have a different discussion.
Thank you.
Do any other board members have comments? Yes, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Clay. I'm clear on the recommendation. The recommendation is to pull out drilling muds from the waiver, have them be regulated under an existing program, and then come back with a longer-term regulatory approach after we've reviewed, right?
Yes.
So that's the recommendation of staff. What are the options in front of the board? I know I just want to make sure before we vote on what the recommendation is, I understand what the options are.
The options, I mean, you have, all the options are available to you, and I'll let Patrick correct me if I'm incorrect here, but I mean, certainly you have the option to propose as recommended. You could adopt an order that was similar to the 2008 order and put that back in. You could decide not to act at all on this, although this certainly is a critical issue to us because a lot of other categories of low threat discharges are included with this waiver, and it's an important regulatory tool for us, and it would be a critical issue if that waiver just went away.
It expired yesterday.
Yes, it did. It expired last night at 11:59:59.
So now it sounded like Carl had an option, Chairman Longley had an option at the beginning of the day of putting it in and then revisiting? Is that what would
Well,
revolve around
certainly
that?
that is an option. I mean, you could proceed with the way the waiver was for some short period of time and then have us come back. I'll let Patrick talk about the potential pitfalls of what that approach is, because we have discussed a number of different options when we were talking about how to move forward with this specific item. You know, part of the issue is that you know, the environmental review for this particular part of the waiver and the discretionary action that is being taken here today. But again, I think I'll turn it over to Patrick. He can do it more eloquently than I can.
I think that there are a few options on the table today. It might be worthwhile to go through some of those options during the course of deliberations after we've heard from the CVD and from the industry representatives, because I think they might even put another options on the table that could supersede what we're considering right now. I will say that, you know, in the context of discussing those options, there's probably risk associated with going down a number of those different roads, and frankly, it'll be up to you to determine what level of risk the board is comfortable with from a legal perspective. And you know, just I'll say this now: we can go into closed session to deliberate upon the options that are in front of you when the time comes to deliberate on this item. You know, I don't think there's, I think, you know, what Clay said is correct. There are a number of options on the table. Some of them come with more risk than others.
Thank you. Any further? John, you want some more?
Yeah, I had another question. And it has to do with the sort of the longer term process of how we got here. It seems like the issue at stake is whether or not our previous environmental document was adequate, and whether things have changed over the last few years. And you know, this is a 5-year renewal, so you know, what, you know, I don't know how to ask the question other than to say, how do we get to the point where we issued one recommendation and then a single letter got us to change a different, to sort of see something we didn't see before? What's the process leading up to getting here right now?
Clay is turning over to me again here. I think, to be quite frank, one of the missing components here was enough lag time to deal with some of these issues. We probably should have gotten this order out there for public review a little bit earlier. When you're continuing a program that has essentially been in effect, at least for these particular waiver categories, since 1982, and you're seeing changes in a particular industry, and I think there have been changes, at least the evidence shows that there have been some changes in the oil and gas development industry within the Central Valley. It usually means that we should get these things on the street a bit earlier to kind of have the time to adapt to these programs, maybe develop another regulatory program or develop some environmental assessment of where we're going before the deadline expires. But as you've heard, the deadline expired yesterday. I think that has a big role to play in what we're seeing here today.
And I think it gets to the issue that, quite frankly, we could use more staff. The executive officer pointed out that the squeaky wheel gets the attention, and there hasn't been a squeaky wheel on this at this point in time until the letter came in. So there has to be prioritization of staff activities, and this is what happens from time to time when you're dealing with in the kind of situation that the executive officer and her staff face.
If I can weigh in, and my apologies to the board that we did, but staff is busy. We had the waiver. We didn't propose changes to that in response to some new information we had through a recent enforcement action. Made some changes to the waiver, and that sort of triggered a whole lot when we recommended a change to the waiver for that particular category. And that should have gone out a lot sooner, because that did trigger some CEQA issues for us. But staff, and I think we'll find, what staff has said, that at the end of the day, when we're done with all this, the majority of these, which are on the west side over poor quality water already, or no water, that we will be able to move many of these into a low threat type activity. This is just the well development. This is not any other well production or stimulation type activities. It's strictly just drilling the well and the muds resulting from that. So I think at the end of the day, we'll be able to deal with many of these as low threat. We just have to do that analysis now, and things have changed for the oil industry. And unfortunately, with all the fracking and the new regulations and everything going on around oil production in the valley, this has just become it's the marijuana but oil. It's just the new headliner issue, and that's what causes these types of things. And we have our due diligence. And once Patrick brought to the attention the CEQA issue, I really can't bring something to the board and recommend it if we know it's a loser from the very beginning.
And at the end of the day, we will have done what we think's best to protect water quality. So,
I just wanted to comment, sometimes one letter can be particularly important, and it's not like this case, but the one letter I go back to that remains in my memory was Felix Smith on estrogen and selenium, and I think the fact that we have citizens in California that call these things to our attention is invaluable.
very good. Unless there's further comments, I'd like to go ahead with cross-examination of staff, and then we'll go to lunch and take a recess till 1. Does California Independent Petroleum Association wish to cross-examine? Good. The Center for Biodiversity, do you wish to cross-examine? And you're representing also Western states in your comments. Good, thank you. Then we will recess until 1 o'clock.